were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Willow?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious friendly commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You will bring me. John, I do not know what strength is in my blood. But I swear to you, I will not let the light city fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
What's up, guys? Welcome to The Narrative, episode 63, named this one The Iranian Knot. And lately, I've just been naming the shows after the most recent article I wrote. And if that sounds a little effed up, it's my show. So, I don't know. If it bothers you, you should just deal with that. But it's also relevant. Been writing about Iran the last few weeks. We've all been talking about Iran the last few weeks. Iran. I'm looking forward to this one being out of the news cycle, not because it's dumb and gay, but because nobody can make up their mind on whether or not to say Iran or Iran. Iran is the correct way, but when you say that, you sound like you're being a liberal that's like, it's pronounced Iran. So everybody's annoyed at you from the beginning. But if you say Iran, the liberals are right and you sound like a retard. So I'll probably go back and forth. Often I've been mixing the two, sort of a Iran-Iran situation. Iran, I think is what's been happening to me lately. We're all a little messed up from it, is what I'm saying. We're discombobulated, in other words. But we are here tonight to disentangle or cut the Iranian knot. And I think we can do it. We're going to talk about, if you guys watched the Blitz from Saturday, Ghost and I were on the Blitz, which is on the Badlands Substack, badlands.substack.com. It is free for all subscribers over there, but it is exclusive to the Substack. We sort of laid a little bit of an appetizer for this show. We talked about some of Donald Trump's, the way he's navigating this stuff. Some of you may have seen, I'm going to call them out right at the beginning, because if any of you guys watch this show or any of my shows, and if any of you guys read my Substack in particular, you will know that since 2023, I have been referring not just to any scenario, but specifically to the Middle East, Iran, and Israel as the Kobayashi Maru of Donald Trump's era. I believe it is Donald Trump's Kobayashi Maru, the impossible task from Star Trek, the impossible test, the unwinnable test, and that he is Captain James T. Kirk, and he has a way through the madness. There is a narrow way through, as Paul Atreides would say. Trump looking a lot like Paul Atreides recently, or at least sounding a lot like him. And these assholes over in the alt media, I've told you guys before, it's not the mainstream media that farms us for takes in the truth community. The alt media does, however. The intellectual dark web types who act like they know what's going on and they're not mainstream media, but they won't go out on a limb and say things that make them sound crazy. So Michael Every of Rabobank, who's this big shot alt media financial guru, said, couldn't help but get me thinking about the infamous Kobayashi Maru scenario in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. For those unfamiliar, we're all familiar, Michael. We're familiar because I've been blasting this from the rooftops, and a little bit of a humble brag, people do actually watch Badlands Media, and they do actually read our Substacks, to the tune of thousands of you, sometimes tens of thousands. So it would be different if we were just running these random little blogs. But these guys know where these talking points are coming from, and that is a very, very specific analogy to this scenario. You guys know where it came from, but I thought tonight it would be good to sort of discuss how that Kobayashi Maru is running. What is it? What is the end game? What's Donald Trump doing? And as is the case on this show, obviously I focus on the narrative, and we will do that. First half of the show, we're going to talk about untangling the Iranian knot on both actual and narrative terms. How is Trump doing both? How is he doing one or the other? They are different theaters, and I do think this is a fusion. I think this is a convergence situation where there is an actual disentanglement going on, but I think there's also a narrative one going on. I don't think it's just one or the other. Some comments from Scott Bessett we can play tonight that hint at both of those scenarios. And the second half of the show, which we will actually get to this week, we've been teasing it the last couple times Ghost was on, we're going to talk about something he brought up a few months ago on the narrative, and that is the macro theme, one of the macro themes of the age of Trump, and especially as it relates to the Sovereign Alliance and the Middle Eastern theater, the return of honor culture. Ghost has been talking about this quite a bit on his own show, and when we do shows together, I think it's a great call. And we're kind of going to talk about how maybe the Iranian scenario and storyline is another on-ramp to this honor culture revival. It's actually something even General Quast talks about in terms of the age of heroes, hero culture, honor culture. It's a thing that's coming back, and it never really died in the Middle East. So, before we get to that stuff, I'm going to thank tonight's sponsors, starting with our main sponsor tonight, and that is our friends at Patriot Protect. We're in the middle of the worst stretch of data breaches this country has ever seen, and it's hitting right in the middle of tax season. In just the last 90 days, a government contractor that handles Medicaid and benefits for 46 states got hacked. 25 million Americans had their social security numbers and medical records stolen. The Texas AG called it the largest breach in American history. Panera Bread, 5 million customers exposed. Under Armour, 72 million email addresses dumped online, all on top of a record 3,300 data breaches in 2025 alone. Here's why you need to care right now. Criminals are using the stolen data to file tax returns in your name and take your refund. The IRS flagged 2 million returns for identity fraud last year, and if it happens to you, the average wait time to get it resolved is almost 2 years. It's not just breaches. Right now, data brokers and people search sites are publishing names, home addresses, and phone numbers, even family members' names, all searchable by anyone online. Scammers don't need to hack you, they just need to look you up. Patriot Protect fixes that. Their search and destroy protocol scans Google and over 200 data broker sites, finds your personal data, and removes it continuously. Most services tell you after your identity gets stolen. Patriot Protect removes the information criminals need to steal it in the first place. Because of what we're seeing right now, Patriot Protect is offering you 15% off any plan. Use the promo code Badlands at patriot-protect.com/narrative. Your data is already out there. Take it back. patriot-protect.com/narrative. Promo code Badlands. You have that? 15% off. All right. Thanks to those guys. And let me see if I don't know if Ghost is alive. Are you alive, Ghost? Is everything okay? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, man.
I'm muted. What's up, dude? Sorry, I was just getting some coffee.
No problem.
Yeah. What's up? How are you today?
I'm all right. I'm just feel like I'm in the middle of the Kobayashi Maru myself, and a lot of people are pretending that they thought of that. But I brought you on because not only do you deal with narratives, you track a lot of the actuals. You look at a lot of the histories of these regions. And first half of the show, I want to talk about the Iranian Knot. And I guess maybe that's a good place to start. Before we get into how these things are getting disentangled, I've got kind of my general conception of what I even mean by the Iranian Knot. But as somebody in your position who has studied this theater even long before you were in, the info war and doing this stuff, how would you describe the Iranian Knot? Not even what's going on right now, but just the lead up to this stuff from a geopolitical lens. I know you don't want to go over a century of history, but basically, well, you do. I'm saying we can't have you go over a century of history. But how do you think, generally, what is the Iranian Knot? Why is this theater in particular such a hotspot in terms of both the actual and the narrative, specifically where it concerns the American perspective? Like, why does it affect us so much? And why is it such a big problem that Trump seems to have found himself in the middle of, according to the central narrative?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I can only offer you my take on it, but my take would be two things. And it really, one word, energy. That's what it all comes down to. And I think you're apt to point that out. But the first would be, of course, the Persian Gulf. That's like the first major oil belt that was discovered. It was discovered, I believe it was 1907. I have the original survey map on my map of the British exploration expedition that discovered that, and then they created the company that was then bought out, I believe, in 1914 by the government, and that became British Petroleum, BP. And then the Mogadeh, who's ran for president of Iran in 1951. He ran on the platform of nationalizing the oil, taking it back from the British, because very similar, by the way, to what Hugo Chavez was talking about in the 90s. He was saying we're getting screwed, like we're not getting any of this money. This money belongs to Iran, and the British shouldn't be taking it from us. We're going to nationalize the oil. He nationalized the oil. The CIA goes to Eisenhower and says, this is unacceptable. Obviously, we need to overthrow this guy and install somebody who's going to give this oil back. 1953, Eisenhower approves it. That was the first, I believe, instance of the president approving the CIA doing a color revolution, like an overthrow of a foreign government. They do that. They install the Shah, who was not actually a royal. That was a dynasty that was falsely created in 1927. And they signed what was called the Consortium Agreement in 1954, which formally gave all the oil back to Britain, back to BP. It was a 25-year agreement, so it was only good for 25 years. And then fast forward to 1979, or really 1978, they go to renegotiate, and they're like, all right, like, let's extend. And because of what was happening in the 70s, namely the Yom Kippur War, the war between the Arabs and the Israelis, which resulted in the Saudis doing the oil embargo, very similar to what we're going through right now. The embargo against the West, anyone who was supporting Israel would not receive oil. And people of a certain age may recall, like, they would only give out gas, I think, on Saturday, and you had to wait in like an 8-hour line to get gas every week for a while. Kissinger is sent by Nixon. Well, two things happened that we should talk about. Number one, and this is according to Jonathan Pollard, who's at that Israeli, the American turned Israeli traitor from the 80s, who met with Mike Huckabee in secret. He says this happened, and a number of other people said this happened. But basically, Nixon said, "We're not going to send y'all any more weapons. Like, this is ridiculous. Y'all need to like shut this thing down, Israel. You're taking this thing too far." Nixon was not sympathetic to Israel the way the other Republicans were. And the Israelis basically loaded up a nuclear weapon onto an aircraft and then taxied the aircraft onto a runway and then called up the White House and said, "Hey, point your satellite at the runway." And they looked at it and they said, "You see that? If you don't send us the conventional weaponry, what we need, the munitions we need to fight this thing conventionally, we're going to use that on Iran or on the Arabs or whatever." And so that, of course, the next day it was approved. Nixon sent them all the weapons they needed. The other thing that happened was that Nixon sent Kissinger, Secretary of State, to Saudi Arabia to negotiate with King Faisal. And the negotiation basically became the U.S. would defend Saudi Arabia, would be its military basically, in exchange for Saudi Arabia selling all of its oil in U.S. dollars.
In U.S. dollars, and that is the petrodollar. And we will talk about that more tonight. But I do think it's interesting that you just laying that out in one sentence, even as you did with Saudi Arabia, like so many, including myself a few years ago, so many Americans that fancy themselves up on geopolitics use the word petrodollar interchangeably, but do not understand what that means. You know, I think as a former liberal, the connotation of the word petrodollar, I think people think, oh yeah, we're fighting foreign wars for the oil, right? That was a lot of the rhetoric of the Bush wars in the Middle East. Like, we're after the oil. But that's not what the petrodollar is. The petrodollar is much more literal than that. So for anybody not aware, as Go said, the petrodollar since that time period means that everybody dealing in oil in this region, in the Gulf region, must denominate that oil in US dollars. Yeah. So whether that is the Chinese buying the oil, the Russians buying the oil, the Indians buying the oil, Axis or allies, however you want to look at these nations, for the last 50 years have been forced to purchase the oil in US dollars. And now that might sound like, well, who cares? They'll just convert it to their own currency after. So to not be condescending about this, but it's very important to get this point across. The reason that's a big deal is because if Russia needs to buy the Saudi oil in US dollars, what does Russia need to buy before they buy the oil? US dollars. How do foreign countries buy US dollars? They invest in the US Treasury bond market. US Treasury bonds are trash. All Treasury bonds are trash. They have underperformed every asset, every real asset. You don't even have to go to Bitcoin. The S&P 500 has outperformed government bonds for the last 50 years since all this stuff. Why have government bonds stayed afloat? It's not because of your 401ks. It's because of the rest of the world buying Saudi oil using US dollars. So I want to keep going, but I think the petrodollar, like it's one of those geopolitical buzzwords. And I think those buzzwords sometimes can just go in one ear and out the other. They're like, yeah, oil and dollars. I get it. No. It is the key, one of the keys to you guys following some of what we're going to talk about tonight. And a lot of the research I've done in the last couple of years has led me into a much greater understanding of what the petrodollar is and how there is no way to disentangle all these things that are going on in the world. And Ghost and I talk about the Sovereign Alliance more than anybody else. If there is a petrodollar, there is no sovereign alliance. One cannot exist without the other. So I just think that's important to drill down there, because no pun intended. Because again, a lot of people do not know what the petrodollar means, and it's very literal.
Yeah, and the really sick part is I think Kissinger came up with that, and it was actually kind of taking something and twisting it, because apparently the term petrodollar already existed before that. I forget the exact circumstance that created the exact conditions that created the circumstance, but I remember digging into this. And prior to 1973, there was a term called petrodollar, but what it referred to was basically people buying oil, and basically it was a deflationary thing because US dollars were being taken out of the market but never used, I think is what it was. I forget the exact conditions. I have to go back and scrub up on it. But prior to 1973, petrodollar meant deflationary. It was a deflationary thing. It actually increased because it was taking dollars out of the marketplace and out of circulation, which is like the opposite of inflation. And then once the petrodollar was formally introduced under Kissinger, which is what he used, the term he used to coin that, that deal that was cut, that, like you said, every single buyer of oil is forced to hold U.S. dollars, hold U.S. treasuries. And that, of course, led to the hyperinflation of the U.S. dollar because then they just started printing money, especially after 2008 with quantitative easing.
And another point there, Ghost, that's the bad side of it, it led to this hyperinflation in certain areas of the economy. But the reason they got away with it for so long is that the good part of the petrodollar is that it is solely responsible for the U.S. stock market being the juggernaut it is. And people don't understand that. This was a new learning for me last year of really digging into Scott Besson's history, who we'll also talk about tonight. The main purchasers of the United States stock market are not Americans. They are foreign governments. So a lot of people, even in this audience, think like, American pension plans and American unions and whatever are kind of buying these 401ks, and that's keeping the stock market afloat. The float in the U.S. stock market, especially like the Mag 7, it's China. Chinese oligarchs and the Chinese government for the last few decades have invested directly in the U.S. stock market because they're forced to buy U.S. dollars via oil or trade in U.S. dollars in terms of their energy trade. So where do they park those U.S. dollars? They park them in the U.S. stock market. So it created this feedback loop where the government, and Trump does this same thing, where they're like, look at how high the S&P 500 is, despite the real day-to-day economy being trash.
Yep.
The reason that is the case is because Americans are not the ones inflating the U.S. stock market. Everybody around the world is inflating the U.S. stock market because they're looking for a place to park their U.S. dollars. And what better place to do that than in U.S. companies? So that's the weird thing where Silicon Valley's valuation, it's not based on the unions. It's not even based on your 401ks, and it certainly isn't based on retail investors. It is based on China, the government of China, investing in Silicon Valley because that's where they think their money is safest. So, again, that gets us a hint as to why I call this the Kobayashi Maru. It is a very difficult knot to untangle, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not just because of the geopolitics. The bigger thing to untangle is the petrodollar itself. Probably the most difficult thing to untangle.
Yep. And yeah, so to round out the history, Kissinger comes back. At this point, we're in 1974. Kissinger comes back. This little thing called Watergate was happening. And because of that, he resigns and he goes, can't do it. Like, disgraced. But he had actually told in 1971, he had two proteges. He told one of his proteges in 1971, hey, I need you to go to Europe and organize all the elites into a group and like a transnational, like a super governmental group. You'll understand why soon. That was Klaus Schwab, and he created the World Economic Forum. And then he told his other protege to go organize the elites in Japan, Europe, and the United States into another supranational, super government organization. And that was Zbigniew Brzezinski, who created the Trilateral Commission. And between those two groups, among others, that's really where like the whole globalist plan, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, all spun out of that stuff. That's when you got like this proliferation of think tanks. You got a proliferation because again, 1971 is another important year because that's when the communists took over the Republican Party. The Trotskyites took over the Irving Kristol and all of his friends. All the Jewish intellectuals from New York City took over the Republican Party. And the Republican Party became a Bolshevik party, which nobody understands, but that's the real history, is that the Republican Party was taken over by the Bolsheviks. But it was the warmongering Bolsheviks. You had the cultural Marxist Bolsheviks and the warmongering Bolsheviks, and basically the warmongering Bolsheviks became disenchanted with the Democrats under Kennedy, because Kennedy was pushing for peace, and then they had the hippie movement, and all the liberals became very anti-war. And they're like, well, that's bullshit, because Trotsky said that we needed constant warfare to fuel our engine of communism. And so we're going to rebrand ourselves as new Republicans, new conservatives, neoconservatives. And that's where all that comes from.
Which is something of the opposite of a conservative, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, exactly.
This new thing, it's not anything like the old thing.
But those guys they were all lifelong Democrats. They're all lifelong communists. Like, it's really important that people understand that. And they became like the most important Republican thinkers in the 90s. Bill Kristol hired Tucker Carlson. Like, Tucker Carlson used to go on Fox News and just like completely crush Pat Buchanan for opposing Israel back in like 1999. He was a neocon, like Tucker Carlson was. But it's also important to understand that the guy on the other side of the table from Kissinger, King Faisal, he wasn't nefarious necessarily. Like, people might think, well, he was trying to screw us. No. He was really good friends with JFK. JFK actually gave him a bunch of advice when he was crown prince, a bunch of things that he should do in order to make Saudi Arabia great. And he did all those things. When right after JFK was killed, he seized power and basically made his brother resign, step down, and then he became king. And he implemented all those things: abolishing slavery, free healthcare, taking all that oil money and investing it in the Saudi people. And that kind of started a trajectory that I think MBS has picked up on, because the year after Kissinger and Faisal negotiated the petrodollar, Faisal was murdered by his nephew, who had just come back from a long trip to Virginia, which is where the headquarters of the CIA is. And the widespread speculation is that the nephew was basically brainwashed and, MK Ultra'd into killing his uncle. I would buy into that. So getting back to Iran, though, the 70s, very, very unstable economic times. Anyone who lived through it will tell you about how shitty it was, stagflation, all of that. But the price of oil went up. Price of oil went up a lot. Iran made a shitload of money. They built some nuclear facilities. And I think the Shah was feeling pretty cocky. And so when they came back and they said, hey, let's renegotiate this deal, extend this deal, he was like, go fuck yourself. No, we're not going to renew this consortium agreement. And BP and the British were like, really? Okay, cool. Hey, CIA 1978 declassifies all the documents, a 25-page document and then releases it to the Iranian press that tells the Iranian people, hey, we installed the Shah in 1953. We, the Americans, your government's completely fake. It's not yours. It's actually ours. We own him. He's our puppet.
CIA devolution.
yeah. And then of course they went and dressed up as the Savak, which was the Shah's like personal police. They went to a movie theater in a big city with 500 people in it, chained the doors shut. They made sure everyone saw them do this, poured jet fuel in the building, lit it on fire, killed everybody inside, men, women, and children. And then that's what got everyone out on the street being like, enough's enough. The Shah's got to go. And then, of course, they flew the Ayatollah from Paris, who was living in Paris in luxury, on a private jet. I think it was CNN who was on the plane with him, interviewing him, being like, what's it feel like to be the new leader of Iran? So, the Ayatollah was installed just like the Shah was installed. It's like, and we were selling them weapons, by the way. And by the way, he gave the British back their oil. And the rest is history. And, there's just like a bunch of bullshit where people were like, oh, well, the Iranian Revolution happened. And now it's a sovereign state. I don't know if it's quite that simple, but so Iran and Iraq spend the entire 80s pounding the shit out of each other while Henry Kissinger and his buddies create a fake economy in the U.S. You might remember like Gordon Gekko, Reaganomics.
Stocks and
So basically, we transitioned from a manufacturer-based economy from like World War II to a speculative, financial-based economy, a consumer economy, where we basically just speculate and gamble on the stock market, and everybody gets rich, but you're not actually producing anything. You're not actually
Right.
making anything. Your economy is just all smoke and mirrors. It's not anything real.
Exactly. That's a great setup for this stuff, and more than a setup. I mean, that's some of the stuff I wanted to talk about anyway. So we already got some of that out of the way. But I think it's the reason I think it's good to set things up that way is, again, I named it the Iranian Knot. That's nothing new. You know, a lot of people can understand generally that this is a very complex geopolitical problem, right? But I think some of that history going back to the 70s, I know a lot of this audience knows that. You don't end up in the conspiracy world or the truth community without at least having heard of the CIA overthrowing the Shah and all this kind of stuff, or installing rather. Both, to your point. They install and then they overthrow. Depends on which day of the week it is. That's even pop culture. Like that was so obvious that pop culture openly talks about the CIA in Iran and everything from the 70s. They weren't necessarily doing that at the time. And some of what you talked about there too, including the Iranian Revolution, that's a good example of narratives being used to massage actuals into the mindscape, right? So you've got the actual situation, which is this regime change, color revolution, engineered entirely from the ground up by the CIA and Western intelligence, British intelligence. But the story, when you ask a normie, even if they have heard of the CIA's involvement in Iran, if you ask a normie, especially from that era, like you said, what happened in Iran in the 70s? What's the first thing they're going to say? They're going to say the Iranian Revolution, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to say the CIA. You know, if they're pretty savvy, if they've been around, if they went down some rabbit holes, they might get to the CIA as like a chapter in the story. They weren't able to hide a lot of that from pop culture. It did seep into the collective mind, I think. And a lot of that was because the 70s were really, as Chris and I even kind of increasingly find out by delving into 70s movies. By the way, this week we're doing 3 Days of the Condor on Story Hour. The 70s film is synonymous with paranoia. There was a national feeling of paranoia. And part of that was about international parties. But you don't have paranoia if you're feeling really good about your national position, even if you think there's baddies out there. Paranoia comes from fear from within. There was a schizophrenia that started to take effect in the 70s, and I think a lot of that, you know, was provoked or kicked off the back of the JFK assassination. But the 70s is really when we had all these regime change. We had the School of Americas in South America, all this shit going on at the same time, where the CIA and Western Intel just went fucking nuts, and or just went hot, I guess. They went really public after they took JFK out. And, you know, a lot of your research, a lot of your stuff over the last few years has gone into all those different theaters. We've been talking about South America in January and February before pivoting to Iran. Next up is probably going to be Cuba, as we're getting that laid out. But I think one thing I wanted to say that I sort of teed this up on Saturday on the Blitz is the reason I think it's important to talk about this as the Iranian Knot, to be as blunt as possible and as simple as possible. A knot is tied, okay? A knot is engineered. A knot is something a human being puts together. It is not something that just happens. And the untangling of it is what I refer to as the Kobayashi Maru. And I instinctively did that in 2023 is when I used that framing. That was in the wake of the October 7th attacks, the October 7th narrative. The reason I referred to it as the Kobayashi Maru at that time was more about the story. It was more about the narrative, not the actual. I knew way less about the Middle East than you do. So you know a lot of the actuals of what would need to be done to disentangle these issues in the Middle East. But even at that time, I had picked up on the narrative of disentangling the US from the Middle East and the Middle East from each other is incredibly difficult to untangle. And you kind of teed this up, but if you want any evidence of that, our community and the MAGA world is actually a pretty good indicator of just how damn complicated this knot is and how carefully Donald Trump must tread, because until the Israel-Iran narrative really went hot in 2023, as a former liberal, I had said on these shows going back to 2022, I have never seen a community that is so open about the sort of discussions that we need to be having in this country, right? It felt like it was very freeing for former liberals like myself and Chris Paul coming into the truth community, coming into MAGA, being able to talk about your liberal values, getting on the Trump train, realizing where you'd gone wrong. Most conservatives in our audience would admit that they got bamboozled by the Bush regimes, right? So there was a lot of mea culpa going on in the American mind. And MAGA really became a symbol of that until 2023. And in 2023, certainly the former liberal in me, and probably a lot of you guys, realized after October 7th, oh, a lot of MAGA still has quite a bit of programming in their psyches from the 70s and 80s that Ghost kind of just laid out. And I think that's a good place to kind of lead things, is that on an actual level, we can talk about how you have to disentangle these things. But on a narrative level, it's almost even more difficult for Trump, I think, to navigate this whole storyline, because if he's too hard on Iran, the entire liberal mindscape sees it as warmongering and you're just a Bush neocon. And I know people in this audience don't agree with that. I'm talking about the mainstream perspective, is the optics. It, as we've been saying on shows in recent weeks, optically, the central narrative looks, in MAGA right now, looks patently absurd to the liberal mindscape, right? They are playing side-by-side videos of Donald Trump literally running a campaign on not doing what we are told he is doing right now. This is a disconnect in this audience sometimes. I am not telling you that's bad. And many of you believe it's good that Donald Trump is doing what he's doing. And ultimately, Ghost and I think that Donald Trump is doing a lot more than people think, and that it's a good thing. But from a central narrative perspective, Donald Trump is emphatically losing the story at the beginning of this stuff with the liberal hive mind, because he said he was not going to do this, and then he did it. So it really is that simple to a lot of Americans. And I do think he's untangling stuff here. I do think there's a reason we had to do all of this. And I do ultimately think the story will be good for Trump and the MAGA base. But I think on the other end, and you deal with this a lot, you have really kind of put your feet in the fire. You've thrown yourself into the fire the last couple years on this topic. So I just mentioned the liberal hive mind that has PTSD from the Bush regime years and is like, forever war in the Middle East? Get the fuck out of here with that. We don't want that. You're just another Bushy. Turns out a lot of MAGA are Bushies, and I've been telling you guys this since 2022, because if you get drunk with one at a bar, they will start spouting neocon nonsense about glassing the desert. Or if they've served in the military, you're seeing a lot of that right now. A lot of military MAGA are like, yeah! It's like, hold on. Aren't you guys anti-intervention in the Middle East, and now you want to glass the desert again? Okay, I get it. But Ghost has really put himself in the fire where it comes to the conservative mindset. And the conservative mindset that Trump has to disentangle is the exact opposite. And that is that they want to be entangled in the Middle East if it is on behalf of our greatest ally, Israel. And again, I'm not saying we have all the answers here, but I think the reason this is the Kobayashi Maru for Donald Trump is that this, you could argue that outside of his core base, including us, that really think there's a lot of method to Donald Trump's madness, from a normie perspective, conservatives have a right to be absolutely furious with him right now, and liberals have a right to be absolutely furious with him right now. And he just laid it on the table, and he's going into the fire, and I think they have known this whole time, going back however long, this was going to be the toughest narrative to navigate, and the one where they're going to take a lot of the slings and arrows. But I wonder what you think of that, just again, the narrative disentanglement that he's having to weather.
Absolutely. And it's really important. I mean, I said this to Ash on one of the shows that we did. It was either one of those Tuckabee shows or maybe it was The Choice that we do every week. But most of the content that I produced at Badlands has really actually been surprisingly tailored towards Christian Zionists, because I view them as the most heavily psyoped group in the world. I think they are the most heavily psyoped group out there. And you can expand that, there's layers to that group, that demographic, but it's 40 million, I think, last figure that I saw. It certainly makes up a lot of the core of the MAGA base, the populist movement. Outside of that one issue, very based on like all the other stuff, right? But that one issue, there is a very specific mindset that has to do with dispensationalism and the Scofield Bible and all that. That's its own little rabbit hole. We don't need to go down right now. But do you want to laugh really, really hard?
Well,
share my
I'm
screen.
not going to, because you already.
Okay, let's share my screen, because I'm gonna make you laugh really hard. I think Chuck Norris, I think died today. Is that, or yesterday?
Yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Yeah.
Okay.
R.I.P. Chuck.
Yeah.
That
so
sucks.
the first instance of any mainstream Hollywood film using a Muslim terrorist as the bad guy was this movie right here called Delta Force.
Oh my God.
a 1986 American action film starring Chuck Norris. And this is where it gets even funnier, though. Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin. It was inspired kind of by some real events. In 1980, Operation Eagle Claw is aborted after a fatal helicopter crash. And if you don't know what Operation Eagle Claw is, that was in 1980, Jimmy Carter tried to send in this new group that had been created, Delta Force, into Iran to try to save those 52 hostages that were taken hostage right during the Iranian Revolution. And these helicopters all crashed and like 8 of them died. And it was a catastrophic failure. And that was one of the things that like Reagan used against Carter during their campaign. And then of course Reagan comes in and the hostages are all immediately released. And a lot of people speculate that was already negotiated, that was already in the books before. But if you go back to this movie, 5 years later, in 1985, a group of Palestinian terrorists hijacked American Travelways Airlines Flight 252, Boeing 707, flying from Cairo to New York City via Athens and Rome. And basically what this movie does is it says the Palestinians and the Iranians are the bad guys. It's a bunch of Jewish passengers on this plane. And then it is the Delta Force working with the IDF, working with the Mossad and the IDF together that saves the day. And it basically communicates to the American public that, hey, the IDF, like Israeli special forces, they're badasses. These Delta Force guys, they're badasses. And these Palestinians and these Iranians, I mean, these are the real bad guys. There is a sequel made to this movie, just to take this a little further. And this also starring Chuck Norris. This is called Delta Force 2, The Colombian Connection. And this is where Colombia...
It's so on the nose.
Yeah, and it's like Colombia and the drug cartels and cocaine. And by the way, if you don't know that history, the Israelis were actually like sending weapons nonstop to those guys, and they were all using almost exclusively just Israeli-made weapons. And Colonel Tanner Watkins has done a lot of the actuals on that. I've seen the research where the Israel Weapons industry, the IWI is the company. But it makes all of the weapons that the IDF uses, and a lot of these cartels were using them as well. And then there was actually a third one made called Delta Force: The Killing Game, and this brings in the Russians, the Spetsnaz.
Oh, of course.
And so now the Spetsnaz are working with the terrorists, right? They're working with the Muslims, and and I think the setting might be Miami. I don't know. Anyway, these might be some fun movies to explore on Story Hour. But yeah, what this does, because this last one comes out in 91, this sets up for the 90s and really moving forward that all the mainstream Hollywood movies, I don't know what the saying is, but it's like the Russians, the Muslims, like those are all the bad guys, right? The Russians, Muslims. Yeah. It's like
one of the
mustachioed men, right?
Yeah, one of the what's it called? Righteous Russia articles. I think it was part 1, which was the second one I wrote, but it's called the 3 story. No. It was after that. I think it was part 2, where I kind of go into Vladimir Putin and some of his history. A big part of that article is talking about the programming into the Western psyche of the prime villain of the last century, and that is the Russian. And, people might think that's counterintuitive because they're like, well, what about the Germans in World War II? Well, what happened after World War II? We're great allies with Germany, right? Germany's like the heart of Western power projection in Europe until they had no power projection. But, we've been good with Germany since the 50s and very good with them, again, according to the central narrative. So one of the ways I had framed that back when I wrote that series was that from a writing perspective, the Russian has been the preeminent long-running threat. So if you're writing like a screenplay or a 3-act structure, and I mean 3-act in terms of like 3 books, like a trilogy structure, the way you tend to write those is you've got your flashpoint villains of each act, but then you've got a prime arc, they call it, but a prime villain arc that threads its way throughout the entire narrative. They tend to kind of be in the beginning. You don't know how big a threat they are. Maybe there's even some direct confrontations with the hero from the prime arc, but they are kind of behind the scenes. You usually find out, you think there's a big bad that the hero is going to come up against, or the alliance. And then when they defeat the big bad, they find out there's somebody else behind the big bad. In the Marvel movies in the last 20 years, it's Thanos, right? You had a movie against Loki, then you had an Avengers movie against Ultron, then you had this, then you had that. But all through all of them, there was these whispers of like, there's this guy behind the scenes, and even the villains are afraid of him. And the Russians have been that. They've been threaded throughout World War II, after World War II. Remember, as we've pointed out on this show, when you've joined me, the Allies were not, they didn't want to call the Russians allies, even though they had an awful lot to do with defeating the Nazis in World War II. It's just like, when you play Axis and Allies, you don't really deal with the Russians a whole lot. You don't think of them like you think of the Brits and the French and, afterwards, the Germans. But so that's definitely been a prime narrative. And one of the other ways I framed that in that series was the war that was promised. The long-running war that was promised by the deep state, by the central narrative, and even programmed into the Western psyche was the war with Russia. I really believe that was meant to be the final war. They were obviously seeding it in the 60s with JFK. They tried to get that shit going. JFK and Nikita Khrushchev found off-ramps from that. I think we're going to get reruns of that with Trump and Putin. The 70s, to your point, they had the Soviets bubbling in the background. The 80s is really where they brought the Soviet boogeyman out of hiding. And it became the prime narrative war, was the East versus the West, the Russians versus the Americans. And to your point, in the 90s, they kept that shit going. And I really think it's only been through the engineering of people like Putin that we have actually avoided that. And then last point on that would be, as I've said on the show before, part of my awakening as a liberal before I became MAGA was the understanding that, hold on, it seems like Obama and the Clinton regimes really want us to get into a war with Russia. And Donald Trump was highly critical of that stance. So it really has been this macro theme threading its way underneath everything. And it's kind of interesting because when we come back to Iran and the Middle East, you've been talking about this on recent shows, well, going back a couple of years, but we've kind of been looking for what are the main on-ramps to these sovereign alliance peacemaker storylines we've been talking about for a few years. And it might not be this one, but if you did want a common thread here, you're looking at Iran and the Western hegemon, and then you're looking at how Iran connects to Russia. And it really is this flashpoint right in the middle, both actually from an energy perspective and narratively from an East-West perspective. That's part of that Kobayashi Maru in my kind of framing is, okay, if you want to disentangle us from Iran, you need to know what the Russians are going to do. If you're the Russians, you need to know what the Americans are going to do. Otherwise, you've basically one or the other of you are going to have to keep influence in this region.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember Air Force One. I think I saw that movie in theaters. I was like 10, like in 5th grade. My dad really wanted to see it, and I think he was watching the kids that night, and so he took my brother and I to go see it. And Yeah, I mean, that was Harrison Ford is the president, right? The Air Force One is taken over by neo-Soviet Russian terrorists led by Gary Oldman, and it just reinforced this idea of like, even though we're 6 years removed from the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russians are still the bad guys. They're terrorists.
Still out there.
They were seeking a nuclear weapon. I think Kazakhstan was like the home base of the story plot. So yeah, I mean, it's like this just. And it just continued on and on and on and on. And then you got shows like Homeland and you got, I mean, all of it. It just kept and all this is cultural. It's all storytelling. It's storytelling to be like, this is the bad guy. 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 So that when the news starts reporting on this stuff and talking about like very real wars happening or, you know, whatever, you're like nodding along. You're like, well, this makes sense. I've seen this in so many movies. Of course, these people look like this. But you go and you look back at it and you're like, what is the first instance in our culture of like an Islamic terrorist being introduced to us? It's like, oh, it was actually like Hollywood who taught us about this. And before that, it was a book written by a guy named Benjamin Netanyahu before he became a politician. Literally just a book. I think it was just called Terrorism, where he was explaining to the Western audience what a terrorist is and made it synonymous with Islam. So again, these are just layers and layers and layers and layers of psyops. But let's fast forward let's fast forward to the Trump administration, because I think that's where the story gets really interesting. Yeah. And Matt Arrett has really interesting, my co-host on Breaking History has really interesting research he's done, where he suspects that at some point, like 90s, 2000s, in his estimation, he thinks that Iran regained its sovereignty to some extent. I mean, one thing they never did, and he may be right, he may be wrong, I don't know, but he points to a lot of like the cooperation that was happening between Iran and guys like Assad and Saddam Hussein, like not Saddam Hussein, but people who were considered like verboten. They were considered like persona non grata by the Uniparty. That doesn't necessarily mean that the person is, in my opinion, that they're sovereign, but I don't know. That's Matt's theory. But what I can look at is I can look at what happened during the Trump administration, because let's start here. Where are we? Right. I'm going to share my screen. So this guy, Ibrahim Raisi, this is the president of Iran from 2013 until 2020, until 2021. The president of Iran from 2021 to 20. No, that's Raisi. I'm looking for Rouhani. This is Hassan Rouhani, from 2013 until 2021. He is the president of Iran. Now you'll notice, looking at him, he is a Sharia lawyer. He's an Islamic cleric. He's a mullah, right? So he's a religious extremist, right? He's an ideologue. He's a theological ideologue. The guy who replaces him in 2021 is Ibrahim Raisi. Again, another mullah, and he dies in a helicopter crash in 2024, and then he's replaced by this guy, Masoud Pezeshkian, after an election is held, and he is a heart surgeon who claims to be a reformer, who claims to be a moderate, clearly doesn't dress like those other two, and speaks very differently than they do as well. Now that's just surface level optics. Like the optics of that are interesting, but let's back up to Trump's first administration, because there is a really interesting timeline that happens here that I recently stumbled upon. In 2018, you have this. May 8th, 2018, President Trump is ending United States participation in an unacceptable Iran deal. Most people are familiar with the Iran deal that Obama signed, right? Trump pulls out of it May 8th, 2018. 1 week later, this is from the U.S. Treasury Department. Treasury targets Iran's central bank governor and an Iraqi bank, moving millions of dollars for IRGC Quds force. And so they are sanctioning specifically this guy named Saif. Okay, so he's the governor of the Iran Central Bank. It's important to note that the Iran Central Bank, along with the Iraq Central Bank, or at least used to be, not part of the Rothschild banking network, not part of like the Western banking system. They're outside of it. Okay,
that'll get you helicoptered.
That will get you helicoptered very quickly. If you want to die, just make sure your central bank is not part of the Rothschild network.
Yeah.
So they target this guy Saif and a number of other people with sanctions. They accuse them of basically laundering money, like stealing and laundering money. And then we get this. 2 months later, where is that story? It's right. So 2 months later, in July of 2018, Iran just suddenly removes this guy from the government. Like, Saif, you're no longer the governor of the central bank. Done. 1 month later, August, they arrest the vice president of the central bank and then a number of other guys working under him. Now the vice president is a guy named Ahmad Arakchi, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because he's the nephew of the current foreign minister Arakchi, who at the time was a deputy foreign minister.
Yeah.
Okay,
he's the one talking all that shit.
Yeah, he's the one who's talking a lot of shit right now. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So his nephew gets arrested. This is all under Rouhani. Remember, all this is happening under Rouhani. And what ends up happening is that Saif gets sentenced to 10 years in prison, and Arakchi gets sentenced to 8 years in prison. And if you look at the sentencing, like, what were they actually accused of doing? What they were accused of doing by the Iranian government is they were accused of selling $150 million, illegally selling $150 million of U.S. cash that they had in their possession, and $20 million of euros, which was, like, I guess it's illegal to possess this or sell it in Iran, whatever. They had this in their possession. They weren't supposed to. Now, if you back all the way up to the beginning, like the Iran nuclear deal, do you remember, like, what the big scandal was surrounding the Iran nuclear deal under Obama?
The pallets of cash.
The pallets of cash. 400 million in US dollars cash sent secretly to Iran, and 40 million euro sent secretly to Iran. And so these guys were selling this money. I actually don't think the Iran nuclear deal that Obama negotiated had anything to do with energy. I think it was all just a big money laundering scheme, and probably to finance, like, these militias that were out there. Right. I think these militias were being run I think these militias were being run by Soleimani, and I think Soleimani ultimately was working for Mossad. And the reason I think he was working for Mossad is because the day before they were going to take him out, they took him out January 3rd, 2020. The day before, David Barnea, who was running he was the point man on the Soleimani file in Mossad, calls up the White House and says, "We're out. We're done. We're not doing it. Sorry. We just don't want to do it. Sorry. Thanks. We're not doing it. We're out." And so Trump, because the whole thing was the U.S. provides intelligence, Israel fires the missile, Israel takes the credit for killing him. That was the whole plan. And David Barnea and Netanyahu call Trump, say, "We're out." And Trump turns to General Dan Kane, as he tells it, and Dan Kane says, "We can do it if you want. Like, we have a missile. Like, we can fire a missile and take out this guy." And Trump says, "Do it." And so then Trump does it himself. And then as Trump tells it, he says, "I will never forgive Netanyahu for backing out." And at the last second. And my assumption is that I think that Soleimani was working for Mossad. He was a Mossad asset. And that actually, like, that's something I've thought for a very long time, for a few years now.
Let me pause you there for 1 second, because I just want to show people a clip that you've all probably seen, but it's good to go down memory lane because it's related to the Iran nuclear deal and the pallets of cash you're talking about. We all remember one of Trump's most banger-ass quotes. So here's a short clip of him talking about that.
Deals. And, we talk about different things with, I'll go off the housing subject for a second, but we talk about different things and what's going on with our government. Our government isn't giving us good protection. Our government has unleashed ISIS. I call President Obama and Hillary Clinton the founders of ISIS. They're the founders. In fact, I think we'll give Hillary Clinton the, if you're on a sports team, most valuable player, MVP. You get the MVP award. ISIS will hand her the most valuable player award. Her only competition is Barack Obama between the two.
I mean, they age like fine wines, a lot of that, even though they're a bit bitter. 2016, August of 2016, he calls Obama and Hillary Clinton the founders of ISIS and Hillary Clinton the MVP. Now, you think of Benghazi, arms deals. I think that's what he's referring to with Hillary Clinton. I'm sure Benghazi was not the only arms deal. Remember, we only hear about the ones that go badly and result in the Hollywoodification of and the overcomplication of a deep state arms deal gone bad. We probably had some U.S. Special Forces that figured some shit out and didn't play ball. And then we get Benghazi and the lionization of Benghazi and all that kind of stuff. But how many of those deals do we not know about? How many pallets of cash have been moving around that we have no idea about? So, it makes me wonder, on the subject of Iran and the pallets of cash ghost, did the deep state get a little spooked by how badly some of these deals were starting to go that were fly-by-night sort of deals? And to your point about Obama, was the Iran nuclear deal the attempt to legitimize the funding and basically run public cover for the funding of ISIS and this whole war on terror, because they had been doing it in a clandestine fashion, and they had got some egg on their face doing that. It seems like there were some people, perhaps in U.S. Special Forces or Intel, that were starting to ask some questions about what the State Department was doing with its money and its weapons in the Middle East. And it makes me wonder, in hindsight, if that was part of why Obama felt the need to legitimize big deals like this.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And by the way, there were Q posts that occurred in August. I'll share my screen here on Rouhani, where specifically this is the one that comes to mind, the August 28th, 2018. Now this is 3 weeks after the arrests happened, but watch Iran, something incredible about to happen. Hassan Rouhani, the good people of Iran have the power, fight for your freedom. So, and then there are protests that happen in Iran after that. And it's unclear exactly, through all this. I remember watching all that stuff and being all right, but again, it's is this a color revolution? Is this something that's positive? It's always hard to know. And speculating is just speculating. But now we jump forward to because Soleimani's taken out 2020, and then we jump forward to the second Trump administration, right? And you get the 12-day war, right? And so what happened in the 12-day war? Well, Israel started a war with Iran, right? Just started bombing Iran. And again, before that, leading up to that, we had many situations both during the first Trump administration, because after Soleimani is killed, as Trump says, they called him up Trump and they're like, well, we have to retaliate to save face, because of honor culture. So we're just going to fire some missiles at this empty building, just make sure no one's standing in the area. And that'll be that. And we can tell people we did something. Nobody gets hurt. We're good. That's what happens. Then under Biden, we had some missiles that got exchanged between Israel and Iran. This was 2023, 2024. And same thing happens. Israel bombs Iran, and then Iran responds by sending 150 missiles that land in the desert. And I don't think I think one person died, but it was from debris falling off one of the intercepted missiles, right? It wasn't they targeted the guy. So again, very strange, because if Iran wanted to destroy Israel, that was their chance, right? To retaliate from being attacked. That would have been, all right, we're going balls to the wall and we're going to kill all of you. Didn't happen. Then you get to June of 2025 and you get the 12-day war. And basically the way that the 12-day war culminates is that Trump steps in, launches the B-2s, blows up the nuclear facilities, and then says, it's done. We're finished. Everyone pull back your planes, pull the planes back, Netanyahu, we're done. And then Trump wakes up the next morning and is getting on a helicopter to fly to, I want to say he was going to the UN or something like that, or some G7, something like that. And he's asked about this. They say, "Hey, Netanyahu's still sending planes to Iran to bomb Iran," and Trump turns around and says, "I know." He doesn't. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. That's what he says.
Yeah.
He says he better turn those planes around right now. And in this war, the war is over, and that's what ends up happening. But it requires a little arm twisting because Netanyahu doesn't seem to be quite convinced that the war is over and that maybe those nuclear facilities were destroyed.
As we said, the two parties that agreed not with each other in the central narrative, this is where people get it twisted. It said at the beginning of Operation Epic Fury, look for, if this follows the template that you're discussing from Midnight Hammer, look for one narrative tell in the early going. Do Donald Trump's assertions about events get codified by Iran or Israel? And I had predicted Iran is going to agree on what is happening with Donald Trump. They're not going to be friendly because they're on opposite sides of the war narrative, right? Trump is fighting with Iran. So they're not going to be happy with each other, but they're going to agree on what is occurring. And Israel is not going to agree on what is occurring. And Midnight Hammer, to your point, was a great encapsulation of that. But we are seeing it, and last week in particular was the first time we saw that really directly during Epic Fury, where we had the reports of the Israeli attack on Iranian energy infrastructure, and Donald Trump put out a very similar message saying, we did not know about this. There will not be another attack by Israel on Iranian energy infrastructure. So again, it's like Trump and the Iranians agreed that Israel made a decision, and the Israelis initially refuted this. And then later on, they acknowledged it. So that was pretty funny. The initial framing from Israel was, no, that's not true. But yeah, then they ended up admitting it.
And I want to talk about what happened last summer. But before we do, just share my screen. This is from yesterday. This is yesterday's news. Iran says that the U.S. and Israel have bombed the Natanz nuclear facility. No leakage of radioactive materials reported in the area in central Iran. Tehran's Atomic Energy Organization says, quote, following the criminal attacks by the United States and the usurping Zionist regime against our country, the Natanz enrichment complex was targeted this morning, the organization said in a statement carried out.
I need to get coffee.
Carried by Tasnim news agency. That is really weird because I thought this place got blown up last year, but apparently, according to Iran, it's still standing and it's been bombed again. I don't know. Like, again, sometimes I feel like there are things that are just put out there that are meant to confuse us. Sometimes I feel like there are things that are put out there that are like signals to let us know that a lot of this stuff is fake and just narrative. One of those things, by the way, is like last fall when I think it was October when Trump said, I have authorized covert CIA operations in Venezuela. And like just said it deadpan. And everyone was like, like, what does that mean? What is that? And everyone was like analyzing it as if it was like a very real thing. And I'm just like sitting here wondering, like, how hard is Trump laughing right now at the people who are seriously, earnestly analyzing the fact that he just announced that he has authorized covert CIA operations to occur in Venezuela? Like,
that's how secret they are, Ghost.
Yeah. Like, but like literally the people are like putting on their glasses and they're sitting there with their number 2 pencils, like writing it down. And they're like, well, that must means, oh, wow, we're about to go to war with Venezuela. And it's like, guys, like I don't know how much more Donald Trump can make fun of you for like taking this stuff so seriously, but he just told you that he has authorized covert operations in a foreign country.
With Epic Fury, who was the conservative newscaster like a week ago that Trump ripped to shreds for asking him about Karg Island?
Oh my gosh, Kilmeade.
Yeah, Kilmeade. So similar situation you're pointing out there where
we need to watch that video. That video is so fucking funny.
But similar framing where Trump, Kilmeade was basically operating on the basis of what you just described, Ghost, and saying, oh, are you going to attack Karg Island? And Donald Trump is like, you idiot. Why on earth would you ask me that? even if I was going to attack Karg Island, which I'm not saying I'm going to, I would never tell you. But before we watch that clip, again, what is so funny about it is this was occurring during a narrative battle space that's still going on, where Donald Trump is in all caps telling you he's going to attack Karg Island. And then, Kilmeade is like, are you going to attack Karg Island? I can't believe you would ask me that. Like, I would never tell you.
Yeah, and so the timeline on that, because this stuff is all like hilarious. So this is the day before. Like I think he interviewed him on a Friday. This is the day before like Brian Kilmeade was so excited because he had found this like 1988 clip where Trump said, well, if you're gonna go after Iran, like go after Karg Island. Like that's the thing, right? And so Kilmeade was like, listen to him here.
Keep us. But we don't want that kind of disruption for our own citizens. We want our families.
I would love to see him take Karg Island, that oil island. He'd be just like Venezuela. We control their oil. 90% of their oil goes to this little island. The president talked about it in a 1988 interview, and I think he should grab it.
Wouldn't that portend stability?
Keep us.
So Kilmeade is like super pumped because he knows he's going to have Trump. He's going to have Trump on his show tomorrow. And he's going to ask him about this, and man, is like he's going to get a cookie, right? And so here's what ends up happening. Let me share my screen. There it is.
Now here in 2026, you are president. Are you thinking about taking Karg Island, where 90% of the Iranian oil goes through? And what do you think about? Do you remember that interview and that school of thought?
Yeah, but Brian, I can't answer a question like that. You shouldn't be even asking it. It's one of so many different things. It's not high on the list, but it's one of so many different things. And I can change my mind in seconds. But, for you to ask a question, who would answer a question like that? I mean, you're asking me a question, Karg Island, okay, everything. Who would ask a question like that? And what fool would answer it? Okay. Let's say I was going to do it, or let's say I wasn't going to do it. What would I say? Oh, yes, Brian, I'm thinking about doing it. Let me let you know what time and when it'll take place. It's not, it's sort of a foolish question. A little surprising to you because you're a smart man.
I am, but you were just pretty amazing that you thought about it in 1988. So
poor little guy. You got to feel for him. He might be a degenerate warmongering psychopath, or he might not be. He might just play one on TV, but poor little guy. Like he was operating on the basis of the narrative rules that Donald Trump laid out, and that not even from the 1988 interview he's referencing, but like on Truth Social every day. By the way, 3 hours ago, Donald Trump was supposed to unleash Armageddon on Iran. Did he do that, guys? Did the fake news? Nobody in chat has said that Iran is gone. But he did say in exactly 48 hours from 7 p.m. Was it 7 p.m. Saturday or was it?
It was 7 p.m. whenever the post went up. So we need to check.
Maybe that's Monday night. Maybe they get obliterated Monday night.
Yeah, I think they're actually scheduled to be obliterated tomorrow.
Okay,
I think tonight. I think tonight they're being discombobulated, and then tomorrow.
Oh, right. You're right. You have to discombobulate before you obliterate. Sometimes I get those mixed up.
Yeah. Well, it happens. This is what's so fucking funny though is that so Kilmeade's not the only one pushing this narrative. Ben Shapiro's pushing it. They're like all of the conservative influencers are pushing this Karg Island thing, right? Leading into this Brian Kilmeade interview, which is on a Friday. Hours later, if you want to share my screen, this is what Trump posts after humiliating Kilmeade.
Yeah.
Moments ago at my direction, I have commanded one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East and totally obliterated every military target in Iran's crown jewel, Karg Island. It's almost like too funny that he sits there and just totally humiliates and
Kilmeade almost foiled the whole thing, Ghost.
I know.
Trump was just about to call the bombers back because the Iranians were watching Kilmeade and they were like, do you guys think Trump, this is why you just have to have fun with this stuff. Because obviously Trump is having fun with it, right? Because this is why it is, even though everybody thinks we're crazy, and that includes you guys in the audience, they think you're crazy for watching us and taking us seriously. You are, but welcome to the loony bin. people in the alt media are the dumbest. Like the really smart people in the info war who don't know that what we're looking at is narratively engineered are the dumbest people, because they're the ones who earnestly think all the open source intelligence that Fox News anchors are talking about on TV to hundreds of millions of people around the world are indicative of actual war plans. And they think, like, they watch that interview with Donald Trump and they're like, oh my God, guys, if this was a real fucking thing that was going on as it is being translated to us, I'm not saying nothing is happening. I'm saying if the story as it's being translated to us was representative of reality, you're going to tell me that the Iranians don't know that Karg Island might be targeted in a kinetic scenario with the United States? Like, Brian Kilmeade is revealing that to the Iranians and Trump is upset at him because otherwise the Iranians were like, man, should we protect the most important thing to our sovereignty in a war with the most powerful empire in the history of the world? Or no? Let's watch Kilmeade to find out. It's like, this is where I think Trump he's having fun with it. And even in that post you bring up, Trump basically disarms the narrative of like, well, what about the energy infrastructure? Because he's like, we didn't hit that, right? Like, we hit all the stuff that's great and great for the narrative of us winning against the evil Iranians, but we definitely didn't hit anything that would look bad on us and make this a strategic error. And, you know, is there any way to confirm any of this? Of course not. But unless the Iranians were to confirm it, which they do immediately after.
Yes.
So it's, again, these are... they're like, damn it, he came in and he busted up all our military on Karg Island, but if he comes back and blows up our energy infrastructure, we're going to be extra upset.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just, they're like flirting with each other.
Well, if you take what Trump, because Trump totally emasculated Kilmeade. I mean, I cannot overemphasize like how I think humiliated Kilmeade felt in that moment. And he even says, I'm really surprised by this, Brian, because you're typically such a smart guy. And Brian goes,
he goes, I am.
He goes, I am. But if you take the logic that Trump lays out to Kilmeade, he was like, why would I ever announce a military operation that I'm going to do before I do it? Why wouldn't I just go do the military operation? Which is, by the way, it's like, oh, but Trump spent like 5 months being like, I'm going to bomb Iran. and then for like 3 weeks, like all the OSINT guys were like, do you see all the planes moving to the Middle East? Like, holy shit. Like they're moving.
I think something might happen.
And then do you remember when like Fox News reported that all of the Marines got like lobster, like surf and turf? And it was like, Pete Hegseth spent $21 million on lobster for the Marines. And it's like, shit, that means they're going in. That means they're going in. Like they're going in hard. Boys. Yeah. So like, yeah. Meanwhile, Hegseth literally said in an interview like a year ago that he figured out, you know, are you familiar with like the pizza metric or whatever? It's like if there's a big spike in takeout food, like the takeout restaurants, which you can look on Google metrics
among intel, right?
Yeah. So like if all of like the takeout places, the delivery places, the pizza places have a huge spike in activity, which you can monitor yourself. Like any one of us can go look at Google and see how busy any restaurant is. If they all spike like on the same night, then that means that all of the intelligence and like Pentagon guys are convening and so what Hegseth said he does is what he says is that he's familiar with that because that whole thing went viral like a few years ago. So he's like, oh yeah, on like a random Tuesday, I'll just order like $500 worth of takeout delivered just to like keep people on their toes. So people will think, oh shit, like it's about to pop off.
Yeah.
So like Hegseth is aware of that. Like he's aware that people are studying that level of data to like figure out when, and obviously the enemy is going to be studying that as well. And yet Fox News gets the exclusive that Hegseth is feeding the Marines lobster. Right, like right before, So again, like very, very silly. But let's back up again to last summer, the 12-day war, because the 12-day war gets capped off by Operation Midnight Hammer, and then as we've recently learned, weeks later, about a month later, the Iranians devolved their government. Ali Larijani, he was the secretary of the National Supreme Security Council or whatever. He makes the formal announcement on Tasnim, that we have entered a continuity of government protocol. All of the powers of the Ayatollah are now devolved to the 31 governors. We believe that the IRGC has been infiltrated by Mossad. And so we have torn down the entire hierarchy of the IRGC, the intelligence and the military command. We've removed the Ayatollah from the chain of command. That's a really important one because the Ayatollah basically becomes a figurehead, which really begs the question, why are we even talking about the Ayatollah anymore? And yeah, so basically the governors are now allowed to engage in bilateral trade agreements with foreign countries. They're allowed to use foreign currency, including US dollars. They're also allowed to engage in bartering if they have to, in case, like, I don't know, the Iranian rial gets hyperinflated, just in case that happens. We don't know if it's going to happen, but it might happen.
Yeah. Right.
But if it does, you can just negotiate and barter like goods and services as opposed to currency. And oh yeah, by the way, like the low-level missile commanders, you're all allowed to fire as many missiles as you want. Don't have to check with us. You're good. You have all the power now. And then of course, their currency a few months later is hyperinflated by Scott Bessent, who admits to that.
Yeah.
And that leads to the color revolution, which you and I have talked about already. Like, so that's the whole timeline. And now we have bombings happening, right? Bombing Targ Island, bombings of Iran, bombings of Israel. Israeli media is finally admitting they are getting bombed, which they weren't admitting at first. And yeah, it's just, again, like what's real, what isn't real, I don't know. Like we can debate and talk about that, but the narrative, I think, is really what matters the most. And really the reaction to the narrative by these leaders, I think, is what matters the most.
Yeah, one of the reasons, and you started the show by talking about energy. One of the reasons I've really been focused on that, obviously it's become, even in the normie layers, the macro theme, I think, coming out of this, right? For everybody that doesn't want to talk about just geopolitics or the war itself, the story of the war, the macro theme is energy. One of the things I said Wednesday night is that even the most normiest normie is tangentially aware that gas at the pump has gone up by 50% in the last 14 days. I filled the tank up last week for $2.83. I filled up yesterday for $3.67. So like everyone's aware of that. And that's going to start that's going to start surging into consumer price index. That's going to get into groceries. It's going to get into everything, right? So energy is a core macro theme coming out of the Strait of Hormuz and this whole Trump's gambit with Iran. That's basically, if you're a normie, you know that. If you're OSINT savant, you know that. If you're an InfoWar Q truther, truth community person, you know that. And what I'm interested in is what's really going on here. And to your point, we don't know what's actually going on. But I do think you can still ask that question on a narrative level and say, Donald Trump, this is one of the notes I wrote down, is a rhetorical question. What is the alt media getting wrong about the framing of the Iranian Kobayashi Maru? I started the show by saying they are borrowing our terminology. The alt media, I ignore the MSM. We all know that the mainstream media is there specifically to lie to us, right? And we can use them as reverse indicators. But there are entire segments of the internet and the mediascape, the info battle space, that are earnestly trying to analyze events. The reason we kind of just devolved into a little bit of a comedy hour there about Trump and Iran talking about what's happening there, that is relevant because it shows you that the OSINT people and the alt media guys who are earnestly trying to analyze events as they are being translated are totally lost, or, as Donald Trump would say, discombobulated. If you are just following everything Like, wait, Trump said he wasn't going to do this, and now he is doing this. He said he wasn't going to do this with Karg Island, now he is doing it. The Iranians said they weren't going to respond, now they are responding. Like, what the fuck is going on here? What is Trump doing? And I think that's why a lot of them, that article, I didn't read it, but the article I showed at the beginning from Rabobank, Michael Every, that said this is a Kobayashi Maru, their framing was not my framing, to be clear. Their framing was Donald Trump has found himself in the Kobayashi Maru. He has found himself within the unsolvable test. He has a no-win scenario in front of him with Iran. He wanted to disarm them. He wanted to stop them. He wanted to, gain power over the region. Now he's stuck in what they call the escalation trap. He can't de-escalate in traditional geopolitics because he needs to save face. He can't escalate because the escalation just spirals the energy crisis further and further. The reason I say, what does the alt media get wrong about this framing is I think something you would agree with, and a lot of people in our audience. The baseline premise, the baseline assumption that I make is that Donald Trump knows how this ends. He knows how it's going to go ahead of time. And in order to know that, you would need other parties on board, right? If you don't think Donald Trump knew what was going to happen, you're looking at all of this at face value like the intellectual dark web looks at it. If you're in this audience, you probably think that there was a plan here. And that's what I'm interested in getting your perspective on, and obviously I have mine, of what is the plan? What is Donald Trump's plan? We don't even have to talk about the actual and how he's going to accomplish it and whatever. What is the end state, the desired end state that Donald Trump wants to get out of the untangling of the Iranian knot? And I guess I'll start. The answer's in the question for me. I think he wants to disentangle the United States from this region, financially, actually, narratively, and that it's very messy in the interim. We talked about the petrodollar at the beginning, but I think there's a lot more ways this can go. But I think, you approach your geopolitical analysis similarly, I think, by reverse engineering what do you think the desired end state of the various players is. So I wonder what you think in terms of Trump. What is his end state with Iran? And does this get us closer or further from it?
Well, I think the question really is, what's the end state for the Middle East? It's like, what is the end state? Like, what do we want the Middle East to look like when this is all done? And we have different perspectives on what that is. And for many years now, like we've had a very optimistic view, despite, some of the conflicts that have been happening there, which are relatively contained. I mean, like the Gaza war is contained to Gaza, right? It's not happening all over the Middle East. However, it is exacerbating emotions across the Middle East, and it is getting people very anxious and very angry over what they're seeing and what they're witnessing. But I think the end state for the Middle East is for it to be a free, sovereign, stable region, much like Europe, right? Where actual economic investment and advancement can happen, which, as we learned in the interview with Steve Wickoff with Tucker Carlson last year, the big point Steve Wickoff made was you can't get a construction loan to build something in the Middle East because you can't get an insurance bond for, like, you can't get insurance on the construction loan. And the reason the insurance companies won't insure it is because of the like all of the conflict that's happening there. How do they know the construction site isn't going to be hit by like a missile when one of these countries decides to fight another one, right? So that means every single construction project has to be fully funded with cash, right? You can't get a loan out. And anyone who understands like what that means is you can't spread your money out. You have to basically take all your cash and invest it in one project at a time. It's a very slow way to do development from a developer standpoint, versus just leveraging your assets and, building a bunch of stuff at once, which is more likely to generate, excitement and get compounding investment and compounding development on top of it. So I think the stabilization is really important for like guys like MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi, the Qataris, the Emiratis. All of them want stabilization because they want. That's just one example, but they want money. They want investor money coming in, but they also want tourism. They want like all these things to be like Europe, right? The way Europe is viewed in the post World War II lens. But again, the problem is that you have warmongers in the region, and who are the warmongers? Well, we've been told that they were the Arabs. We've been told, but that's been proven to be false because the Arabs are actually very reasonable when you get the right leadership. We've been told that they are the Muslims, the Turks, the Iranians. The Turks have been proven, that's been proven wrong for the Turks, but Turks are actually very reasonable. They seem to be one of Trump's closest allies, actually. So now we have Iran. They're the warmongers, right? The whole reason we can't have peace in the Middle East is because of Iran. And I did a show with Alpha earlier, and you and I both know Alpha's position on this. But what I laid out is let's look at the checklist of why we're at war with Iran, according to the narrative, right? Yeah. What's the one thing Trump said Iran's not allowed to have? Nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, right? And then we're told that that Iran is a theocracy that's run by a bunch of religious zealots, right? And that third, they are hyper aggressive and they want to attack Israel and they want to attack maybe the United States. And so for all those reasons, you check all those boxes, they're hyper aggressive, religious zealots, nuclear weapons. We got to go to war with them. I would posit that you could take that same checklist and you could apply it to Israel and be like, wait a minute. That's the one country in the entire world, go look this up, that has never signed a nuclear non-proliferation treaty ever. The one country. There's 4 countries that have not fully signed all the agreements. Iran is not one of them, by the way. They've signed every single agreement they're supposed to. Israel has never signed one, not one. And yet, not only do they have nuclear facilities, but according to Mark Levin and other Israeli supporters, they have hundreds of nuclear warheads, which they stole from the United States. That's like a pretty commonly known thing from people who study this stuff. Oh, sorry, we stole it. But that's what JFK was trying to shut down. He was trying to shut down this thing called the Dimona nuclear facility. Well, that facility just got bombed yesterday. And that's not according to Iranian media. That's according to Israeli media, that Dimona was just bombed by Iran. So that's interesting. Don't really know what to make of it. But you're asking, what do you think the end game here is? I was disappointed when this narrative started because I was like, now the Zionists and the neocons are getting what they want. That's not great. But rather than get angry about it, I rather understand it. Understand why is this happening? What is the actual intent of this storytelling, regardless of what's actually happening on the ground. And I'm wondering if Trump basically gave Israel everything they wanted, right? Which is a war with Iran. That's what he says. That's what they have said they've wanted for 40 years. They are absolutely giddy when this thing started. However, Iran seems to be fully prepared for this, in a way that, according to the mainstream analysts, we weren't prepared for. How could Trump have done this? He wasn't even prepared for this. That's the official narrative. Yeah. Is that Trump got in over his head. He's got in over his skis. How are these things not actually thought through? Well, when you go and you listen to, I want to play this clip from the Joe Kent. And I know we're going to talk about Joe Kent a little bit, but I want to play this little 1-minute clip from the Tucker interview where Joe Kent says something really interesting right here.
Place in 6 months where they're saying that we have to go back in. And that's essentially exactly what happened. Compartmentalized that there was no debate, as in it was a foregone conclusion. Maybe
talking about the 12-day war and Operation Midnight Hammer.
Exact timing they weren't exactly aware of, or that had to be debated. When do we do it? But it seemed to be a foregone conclusion. And I'm sure others will say, no, that's not the case at all. But there was no robust debate like there was going into the 12-day war, because the big question.
I'm sorry, he's talking about this version of the war. He's saying that the robust debate did happen with the 12-day war. But here, listen to what he says. Okay. Listen to what he says about the conversation that happens at the end of the 12-day war.
A lot of us had that were skeptical of Operation Midnight Hammer was, okay, so we do this. We know the Israelis' whole goal is regime change. What makes us think they'll stop? And if they do stop for a period of time, why won't we just be back in the same place in 6 months where they're saying that we have to go back in? And that's essentially exactly what happened.
So this was raised.
This was raised, to my knowledge, in June. This was.
So again, what he's saying is there was this forethought with the 12-day war, a robust debate, but we understood that, hey, if we do this, the Israelis are going to want to go back in 6 months. In 6 months, or whatever, they're going to want to restart the war. But yet Trump steps in, does this narrative thing with Operation Midnight Hammer. It doesn't matter if it actually happened or not, but that is Trump's reason to say stop, pause. And then in the interim between the end of the 12-day war and the start of whatever the hell is happening right now, we get Iranian devolution. And we basically get Iran setting itself up to prepare for whatever the hell is happening right now. And now we have a situation unfolding, and this is according to Israeli media now, which has taken a long time for them to kind of come to this confession, this moment of like honesty, where they're saying, we're actually in dire straits right now because we don't have enough interceptors to stop all these missiles that Iran keeps sending, even though everyone said that the missiles were going to stop. They actually have picked up, and we have missiles now coming in and hitting places like Dimona, places like Tel Aviv, places like Haifa, Haifa being their only deep water port where all the refineries are. To the extent that we now have CENTCOM cannibalizing PACCOM and INDOCOM, where they're grabbing all of the Patriot missile system, defense systems from, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and they're bringing them over to the Middle East. And now that's generating this excitement over in China. Like maybe it's time for us to take Taiwan because they don't have any defense systems anymore. But that's a whole different narrative episode. The point is that it seems like, as Joe Kent explains right there was no negotiating with Israel over this. Like Israel wanted to go in and do this regime change, whether it happens in 2026 or 2036 or 2046, this is going to happen, right? Like they want this expansionist war. I mean, right now they're in Lebanon and they're saying that they're going to take everything in Lebanon from Litani River south, and that's going to become part of Israel. That is what every Israeli politician is now saying, that like across the board. Even Netanyahu's political opponents are saying that's what we're doing. And so it seems to me what Trump did is he took something that was on a longer time scale, and probably could have easily happened after him and Putin and Xi are all gone and there's nobody there to stop the Israelis, and he condensed it down to something like this. And he even went ahead and paused the war last summer and said, hey, Iran, you have 5 minutes now to go get your shit together. Go get your shit together and prepare for this because they're coming back here in a few months and they're going to want to fight. And then Iran went and did devolution. And now that Iran has done devolution, you can decapitate them all day. Decapitate. But remember, they've devolved all the powers down to the lowest level commanders who can now just pick a target, hit fire. They don't have to ask permission. And again, that's maneuver warfare. That I've had many podcasts that I've done with Colonel Oak and talked about that because he used to teach that to tankers in the Army, which is, as long as you understand the end game, and I'm bringing this all full circle now, we don't care what you do between here and there. You understand that you have to get your tank to the other side of that field. I don't care which bunker you blow up. I don't care who you shoot. I don't care what building you drive through. Do it. Don't come back and ask me for permission. Do it. And so if Trump understands what the end game is, does it really matter like what the path is to get there? I mean,
right.
From a narrative standpoint, right?
And that's where I totally agree with that. A couple people in chat, somebody said the only way out is through. That's one of the first things I was thinking of there. Yep. Another person brought up accurately, my reference to the Iranian Knot is a reference to the Gordian Knot, and that was when Alexander was campaigning against Persia. So, all quite interesting. It's been this way. It's been this way for quite a long time, where this Middle Eastern knot has just been there and kind of acting as this war perpetuation engine. That just seems to keep getting the West embroiled in it. I want to pick up more of that after the break. I want to hit a couple sponsors and get into some of the ways in which, because I agree with you on the end game, and I agree with you that Donald Trump we talk about accelerationism all the time, right?
Yes.
That's something that what is accelerationism? It's timeline compression. It's narrative timeline compression. So if you're dealing with all the damage that is coming as a result of this knot that you knew you were going to have to cut, might as well go as fast as you can. And I will hit you guys with a short clip on the back of these sponsors that might give you some hints as to Trump and team telling you that Ghost and Mai's reading of this as an accelerated narrative or actual could be accurate and could be something that's reflected by them. First two sponsors here are ourselves, starting with Old Faithful Soft Disclosure.
Get you some of that beard oil.
Now that I'm alone at the close-up, do you see how awesome my beard looks right now?
I use the beard oil every single day. First thing, comes out feeling all silky smooth. I take the dropper and I manually apply the oil directly to my mustache. Nice and, oh man, I love it. And then I do drops all throughout the hair, and then I just rub it all in. And then I top it off with the tallow stick on the face.
Dude, I feel like I have to grow a beard just to try this beard oil. It sounds
Do it, Jay.
amazing.
It's all from softdisclosure.com, and the best part about it is you'll be supporting Badlands Media, Annie from Willow and Farms, and basically 3 of Annie's neighbors. So that's 5 total American companies that you'd be supporting with one purchase.
I have been using the Soft Disclosure scentless beard oil every day after the shower. It looks unkempt, but it feels silky smooth. I want to look a little wild and unapproachable, but for the woman I trust, she'll be like, oh, it's actually kind of soft. He is approachable after all. Otherwise, stay away. And Soft Disclosure will help you too with that if that's the very specific vibe you're going for.
That is very specific, yes. You guys are supporting American businesses when you do that. It's absolutely incredible, and you get a great product.
Soft Disclosure, Tiny Bright has been retired for the season. And we are also brought to you by ourselves in the form of GART, which is what, 3 weeks? 3 weeks away, less than 3 weeks. Holy crap. We will see you guys in Nashville. Ghost and I will both be there. Tickets are available.
Patriots, the fight for truth doesn't stop at the screen. It's hitting the road again. Badlands Media is rolling into Nashville on April 9th through 12th for the next stop on the Great American Restoration Tour. Join your favorite Badlands hosts and like-minded Americans for 3 powerful days. Packed with unfiltered discussions, deep dive panels, and real debate. Hear the raw truth, ask the tough questions. No topic too hot, no question too bold. GART is where our community comes alive. Tickets are on sale now at badlandsmedia.tv/GART, where you can also grab a virtual pass and watch from home. Join us to question narratives and fight for America's future. Nashville is calling. The restoration continues. Get your passes today. See you in Music City.
General admission is available. I think this week there will be single day tickets going up for anybody that's in the area, depending on availability there. But we look forward to seeing you guys. Badlandsmedia.tv/events. That's always energizing. And we have one more sponsor before we get back into it, and that is our friends at Rumble itself, specifically Rumble Wallet. Here's a little inside scoop that many creators are talking about behind the scenes. It's actually one of the reasons we use Rumble. They made a way to super chat creators so we get paid immediately and without any fees. YouTube and Twitch take up to 50% fees when you tip creators. This method takes none. That's right, the platform takes 0 fees. We keep 100% of what you send us through Rumble Wallet. You can super chat with Bitcoin, Tether USD, or even Tether Gold stablecoins. The tip will show up directly in our Rumble chat, which we'll do our best to read. All you need to do is download the Rumble Wallet on the App Store and send the tips to your favorite creators. You can go to wallet.rumble.com or download the app directly from the App Store. It's an amazing way to get rid of the middleman and help the creator economy. And shout out to Rumble for this disruptive technology. They've been embracing this stuff, and we do see you guys sending those occasional sats over via Rumble Wallet, so we appreciate it. All right, Ghost. We'll get back into it a bit here. How you just teed us up with accelerationism and a compressed timeline. There is a short clip of my favorite Trump character of the last couple of years. The one that I say is usually dropping the most signal. He's the silent killer in the narrative. And he's got another one, another banger coming at us from today.
Every day, we are taking out their missiles, their missile systems, and the factories that build those missiles. And now the General Kane, Secretary Hegseth, are leading a campaign to destroy all the fortifications along the Straits of Hormuz.
Just to put a fine point on this, though, is the president in the process of winding down this war or escalating the conflict?
Again, they're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate, Chris.
Okay. NBC News is reporting that President Trump is considering sending troops into Iran. Will the administration...
Every day, we are taking...
So, escalate to de-escalate. Last year in the summer during Midnight Hammer, I said, I believe we are watching a denuclearization narrative that is translating or hiding a renuclearization actual. And I think it's pretty interesting. People talking about the only way out is through. We're talking about the Kobayashi Maru, the no-win scenario. And Besant there is telling you these are not mutually exclusive positions, escalation and de-escalation. You're like, well, hold on, that sounds like doublespeak. No, it's game theory, actually. If you accelerate an endgame or a game toward an endgame, as Ghost was laying out, you have to escalate the short-term damages in order to de-escalate the game, which to me means compress the timeline of the game. In other words, if we don't escalate the narrative, the story, the actual, whatever you think is actual or not, we would all agree that the narrative coming out of Iran is escalatory, extremely escalatory, almost, to psychos like us, comically escalatory to some of the truths and clips Ghost was pointing out a little bit ago. So I think that gives you a little bit of a inside baseball. I've long said Scott Bessent is like the guy when it comes to sort of telling you what the plan is, even though that's pretty broad. He's telling you what the philosophy behind the plan is. And second point, to hand it off to you, would be, I think there's a double signal with Scott Bessent. He's talking on a macro about escalation to de-escalation, acceleration to deceleration, which we might say, denuclearization to nuclearization. But I think it's also interesting that Scott Bessent himself represents, he is literally called in the financial world the hatchet man, because he engineered a margin call. He was the first person, arguably, to engineer a margin call on a currency. And he did this on the British pound in the 90s on behalf of George Soros. And now, my supposition, my argument of Scotty Bessent, the hatchet man, is Scott Bessent is demolishing the United States dollar, just not the one you think. So I saw people in chat earlier tonight saying, how could we be de-dollarizing? How could we go against the petrodollar when Donald Trump keeps saying, I'm going to create a strong United States dollar? Well, how can you do that if you're destroying the petrodollar? I think Scott Bessent is your signal there. He wants to disentangle us from the Middle East and from the petrodollar system. The only way to do that in the short term is to weaken the US dollar. And what that's going to do, in my opinion, is accelerate the public mandate for Donald Trump to transition what the US dollar means, meaning what is the US dollar backed by. And this isn't my argument of we're immediately going to shift to a gold standard, a Bitcoin standard. I don't think that's going to happen in this immediate flashpoint. But I think it is accelerating the mandate for drill, baby, drill, American nuclear revival, even if the United States dollar still has this transition window for several years or even a decade that is largely based around energy. It's got to be based around US energy, not Iranian energy, not Middle Eastern energy. And I think that's a big part of the unwind here. So that's just on the energy front and the financial front. But to your point, I think a lot of what we're seeing here is this escalation to de-escalation. And a lot of what you talk about in research is this kind of Israel-Iran permanent forever war narrative. It's like the US-Soviet thing, but, you know, more actual. That they've been the two dogs staring at each other through the chain link fence. And maybe to your point, Trump is like, okay, the gate's open, boys, and we're gonna close it in a little while, but like, or we're not gonna close it. So like, the gate's open now, and you either hash it out or we figure it out. So I agree with that framing as well.
Yeah, and yeah, so what you're talking about is narrative escalation, and that's something that I think in the past like 2 or 3 guards we talked about, like that. I think at the very beginning of the Trump administration, we were like, "What are you looking for?" We're looking for narrative escalation. We're looking for how quickly are we going to escalate this stuff from a storytelling standpoint, so that the whatever has to happen kinetically, if anything has to happen at all, that can be condensed and not drawn out, right? Because again, like I'm open to all possibilities, including there being a kinetic aspect to this.
Yeah.
Now, if we back up to what's going on in Israel, like what's happening to Israel, because again, I think that what Israel wanted is they wanted an earnest war, just like Iraq, where you got boots on the ground from the U.S. military fighting Iran, right? U.S. fighting Iran, which would bring in Russia and China. That would be World War III. And basically all of these empires would get destroyed because they get sucked into like a Vietnam style, like Iraq war, right? It would bankrupt all of these powers. And then it would allow Israel to basically pick up the pieces and form greater Israel, which is what their plan is to control everything from the Nile to the Euphrates. And they're being pretty flippant about that and pretty open about it. Now, if we go to share my screen, I find this fascinating because this is something that has been denied by Israel for so many years formally. After a night of destruction, residents of Arad and Dimona began picking up the pieces. Right here, the second paragraph, although Iran claimed to have targeted the nearby Dimona nuclear facility, it was local civilians who bore the brunt of the attack. Wait a minute, guys. Wait a minute. You're not allowed to have any kind of nuclear facility because you have not signed anything.
You said you didn't.
It doesn't matter what you say you're doing there. You can't have any nuclear facility because you literally you have not signed any treaty that allows you to have a facility, because by not signing the treaty, that means you haven't agreed to allowing the inspectors to come and check it and make sure that everything is on the up and up. And that's kind of like the crux of it, in my opinion. Like, if all of the things that are said about Iran, all the things about them being a problem, and here's why they're a problem, it's actually Israel that's a problem, because they have these nuclear facilities. They're admitting it right here. They're admitting it, that they have nuclear facilities. And yet we know nothing about the facilities. We don't know how many weapons they have. We don't know, assuming that nuclear weapons are even real, we don't know anything about this situation. We don't know anything about it. We have no control over it. And then the question is, well, why don't we have any control over it, considering that we basically fund this entire country from our tax dollars? And it exists only because the U.S. military protects it. That, of course, is its own Kobayashi Maru to untangle. Right. And that's kind of what I think this whole op that is being launched right now by what's his name? Joe Kent. I think that's what that's all about. I will play this real quick because we talk about energy. I'm not a military strategist. I'm not trained in any of this stuff, but here's what I've been saying for years. I said it most recently on March 3rd edition of Badlands Daily. I think I said it on my show even since then, regarding why would Iran Iran doesn't need a nuclear weapon in order to destroy Israel. There are other ways, that the strategic ways. They have enough ballistic missiles, and there are other ways they could do it. Here's how they could do it. Doesn't seem like we're getting the full story. I've said it multiple times before. I don't think a nuclear warhead is what Iran requires in order to take out Israel, because the core argument underlying all of this is that the reason they want a nuclear warhead is to destroy Israel. Well, the argument can also be made, if they are actually pursuing a nuclear warhead, is they want it for deterrence, to deter somebody from attacking them, as France has already made clear, and other countries. Saudi Arabia said the same thing. Many other countries have said, we want a nuclear weapon because if we have a nuclear weapon, nobody will attack us out of fear of retribution. So that argument should also be considered. But if the concern is that Iran is too irresponsible to have a nuclear weapon, and if they get one, they're going to destroy Israel, that's the premise that we're being presented right now, That's why we have to start a war to stop it. Although that goalpost seems to be getting moved a little bit because apparently now it's about ballistic missiles and Navy and whatever. Again, they have enough ballistic missiles to just carpet bomb Israel or just take out strategic points, energy infrastructure, water infrastructure, and make the place uninhabitable. So I feel like that if that was their desire, they would do that. They would have already done that. If they were so irresponsible that they're going to do it regardless, like even at their own destruction, why haven't they done it yet? Like up until this point, I mean, they may do it now that they're at war with Israel. But those are always the questions I have. Is like, well, if they had all this capability, Mark Rubio just affirmed, why haven't they just gone ahead and done it? Like, why wait for like permission from the world to do it? Like, why wait for the justification? Why not just launch everything you have at Israel and just wipe it out? Who needs it? Okay, and so here is the most recent news. This is from RT. Iran vows to target region's water and energy infrastructure if U.S. strikes power plants. And this is, I mean, again, I don't think you have, and the reason I play that is because I don't think you have to be like a military strategist to figure this out, that Israel has no natural resources. It's literally the least strategic country in the Middle East in terms of like, if you were picking partners and you put aside all the religious sentiment, it's the last country you would actually pick to partner with because it has no strategic value at all.
Yeah, it's all been the commoditization and narrative of military intelligence and like a military wedge. You know, it's been a kinetic and strategic partner, but to your point, the only strategy is with the intent of waging war on Iran. Really,
yes.
And
it's a desert country. It's a desert country, right?
So to your point, if you accept Donald Trump at his premise, his own stated premise, and I mean going back that he wants peace, well, you would probably want to disarm a powder keg in the Middle East that is only there for war. And this goes to something Chris Paul and I have talked about quite a bit since Operation Midnight Hammer. And as I said a few minutes ago, that is whether you think it's actual or narrative, the story coming out of these attacks that you're talking about, the tit for tat, the escalating tit for tat, what's one of the macro conclusions that's probably going to come out of this? I believe it's going to be, well, Iran does not have nuclear military capabilities coming out of the end of this. And maybe to your point, Israel doesn't either. And I think that will set us in a narrative battle space wherein Donald Trump gets to come in, perhaps with others, Saudis maybe, Mohammed bin Salman, etc., and the Gulf states in particular, which tees up our next theme I want to get to. Maybe this all paves the way for Donald Trump and the Gulf states and whoever's at the table to come to the table with Iran and Israel after they're done fighting, after they've let the brothers at it, and say, well, listen, who could have seen it coming? But neither of you, it turns out, have any nukes, nor do you have the capability to produce them right now. And before you both start spinning up your next attempts to do just that over the next decade, we are all going to sign a disarmament treaty and a denuclearization treaty. And wouldn't it be something if Israel is part of that treaty with Iran? So I think the Abraham Accords were probably the template for this kind of thing. But the nuclear narrative, to your point about Israel, needs to be disarmed. And how do you disarm that narrative? Well, you tell everybody that their nuclear capabilities were destroyed in an escalating tit for tat with Iran. And on the back of that, Donald Trump gets to save face, which also tees up our topic, and say, listen, I wanted Israel to have all the nukes in the world because they're our greatest ally. Too bad Iran just wiped all those nukes out. Well, now that they're gone, how about we just leave them gone? So I bet you that's where this is going on a narrative level. And again, disarming Israel's chances, and Trump doesn't get, it will be Trump's fault, right? But that's not going to be the story. And I think that also lends a little credence to the idea of, Why, to the Israel hawks out there, or Israel stands, why is Donald Trump willing to start creating a little bit of distance between him and Israel? I think it is so he has narrative shielding to do this, to forward this narrative at the end of the story and say, you know what? It wasn't just me that escalated the situation with Iran. It was Israel who kept escalating. When I said we were done, Donald Trump said, we are not targeting energy infrastructure. And Israel said, fuck that, chief. We're targeting everything. So Trump gets to then turn back around and say, well, you started the fight. You escalated the fight. You brought energy into it, Israel. So now you don't have nukes. And that's going to be your punishment at the end of this. But what do you think of that? And then we'll get into our last topic.
Well, I think that's interesting, and I actually have a clip that I just saw before we went live that kind of speaks to all this and is fascinating. Because again, this could be mostly just narrative driven, but there has been a narrative out there recently that Israel is once again leveraging the fact that they have secret nuclear warheads against the idea of like not invading Iran. Like if we don't invade Iran and go after them and do the things that we want to accomplish, regime change, collecting the enriched uranium, like whatever their daily desires are that seem to be changing all the time, then we're going to just nuke Iran. Like we're just going to go ahead and fire a nuke. That narrative has been out there for a few weeks now. I just saw this video, and again, it might be real, might be true, may not be true, but Colonel McGregor, it's just worth noting that he was one of Donald Trump's top military advisors at the end of his first term. So let's hear what he has to say.
Complete failure to understand that Gaza is the catalyst for the larger war that's now going to begin against Israel. Every Muslim country is going to come on board against Israel, along with Russia, along with China. I'd be surprised if Mr. Putin doesn't make it very clear to Mr. Netanyahu that if he contemplates using a nuclear weapon, he needs to understand something. If you do this, if you use a nuclear weapon against Iran or anyone in the Middle East, we will use a nuclear weapon against you. I'd be very surprised if he has not already said that. We don't understand what we've walked into because we're not informed. We still think this is 1991. Listen to the rhetoric. I'm ready for peace now. We've made our point. We hope the Iranians understand us and will make peace. Have you lost your mind? The war is now just beginning. There's a complete...
Yeah. So, and again, I think like a lot of the rhetoric, like I feel like when Colonel McGregor speaks, he's not speaking to like the Trump administration. I think he's speaking to the subversive elements in the Trump administration, which again, Joe Kent talked about that in his, in the interview that he did with Tucker Carlson. But that takes us into honor culture, because I think that you're right about what you just said. That's a really interesting take, by the way, that they just take out their nuclear weapons or nuclear facility or whatever.
And more importantly, the story to not be able to restart it, because otherwise it doesn't matter, right? If they can just spin it up again, Trump is going to take that narrative away from them, I think.
Yeah, but like the more dangerous dynamic, I think, in my opinion, than any specific kinetic weapon, ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, nuclear missiles, whatever, is the psychology in America as it relates to Israel. This idea that like no matter what Israel does, they have a blank check and we just have to back them, support them no matter what. They have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to do whatever. They want to go wage war against Lebanon, let them. They want to go wage war against Syria, let them. They want to wage war against Gaza, Iran, we got to back them. Like that needs to be unwound. That's the Kobayashi Maru that we have to disentangle. And I think that, I told Alpha this earlier that, and I've said a little bit of this in the Badlands chat. Ever since this Joe Kent thing happened this week, I have received more text messages from like family members and other people who I've been trying to red pill for years on this stuff. People who are like, into politics, but they're kind of normies. Like they watch Fox News. They still watch Fox News. 3-time Trump voters, right? So they're like, they're MAGA, but they're not like exploring the things we're exploring. They're texting me now and it's all fully clicked for them. And like, I mean, they have basically been like, okay, so Israel is actually like the issue that's the thing we need to deal with, because that's the reason we can't have the golden age is because of Israel. Like they won't let us, because we have to go invest all of our blood and treasure in the Middle East to help them build their empire. That's pretty much what this is.
And as you often talk about on your shows, again, it's actual, to your point, but it's really the narrative of Israel as our greatest ally, and who are the ones that are really locking us into that. It's all of the American congressmen.
Yes,
that
and
represent the Republicans,
and Christian
right?
Zionists, and the Christian Zionists who outnumber the Jewish Zionists like 5-1, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's like 5 times as many Christian Zionists as there are Jewish Zionists, and they are very eager to support these war efforts in the name of Jesus, of course.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
that's what he wanted, right?
Yeah. So I think disentangling that and basically like latching onto that and addressing that is so critical. However, how do you do that? Like, how do you even begin from like a strategic standpoint to engage in that? Because Trump can't hold a press conference and like lay this all out. Like that would never work, ever.
No.
Like, yeah, he would be, I think, disregarded not only by his enemies, but also like the Christian Zionists would be like, well, Trump doesn't.
The entire uniparty would have their narrative fully
Yes.
weaponized, and with the risk of actually getting buy-in on that, because to your point, the AIPAC sort of contingent and the Rhino contingent, the Christian Zionist contingent, would be able to say Donald Trump is turning his back on Jesus. I know that this audience doesn't feel that way, but there's a lot of normies who do feel that way if he went down that rhetorical path. And then the liberal mindscape, the normie mainstream media unawakened mindscape would say he's anti-Semitic. You know, it's the one narrative, it's the one term that a Republican will hit you with and a Democrat will hit you with, and they will link arms and say, we may not agree on much, old chap, who is definitely not uniparty, but that man over there is anti-Semitic and he must go, right? Like, it's the one thing. It's the unification narrative of the uniparty. It's what grants them narrative shielding, which is why I know people like, there are some people that think that this narrative is long in the tooth and that you've been hammering this Zionism narrative, since you came to Badlands, but really in earnest since 2023, obviously, because of this event. But besides that, it's been in the news the whole time, and it's been a part of the macro story, and right now is a massive part of the story. One of the reasons I think Ghost is focused on it so much is that it's the recognition that this is the sword of Damocles, the narrative sword of Damocles that has been hanging over Donald Trump. And this is part of why I have been framing it as the Kobayashi Maru. And a lot of your commentary has brought in that Zionist element that I didn't really understand as a liberal. I heard the term. I got that there was this connection between conservatism and Israeli, kinetic aggression, but I really did not understand how deeply rooted that was. And you brought a lot of that out. And I think Trump is bringing a lot of that out. And not to get too extreme and metaphorical, but part of what I think might be going on here from like a narrative, and if you want to say spiritual angle, and you and Ash might talk about stuff like this on The Chosen, he's sort of triggering a little bit of an exorcism within the within the American zeitgeist, specifically within the Christian zeitgeist.
Yes.
And that's as somebody, again, who I don't know a lot about that stuff. I'm just kind of watching Donald Trump provoke something, and it's these Christians, these uber Christians, the specific kind of Christians that are freaking out and are really triggered right now. Ones we knew at Badlands that got triggered back in 2023. And it's like, hold on, holy shit, dude. I've been doing a show with you for 2 years, and all of a sudden now it's like, we can't talk about the Middle East. But it's like, well, I knew you were Christian, but I didn't know that there was different kinds of like, there's like Christians from what I understand, and then there's like whatever this is.
Yeah.
And whatever that is.
That's a good way to describe it.
So, and I think, again, I think that part of the Kobayashi Maru, part of the reason I've called this the Iranian Knot, is not just a geopolitical situation. This is a spiritual disentanglement that is going on. It is geopolitical. It is financial. It is trade-based. It is energy-based. It is military, kinetic, and it is spiritual. It is spiritual and cultural. And I think, I want your thoughts on that. And then also the honor culture section of this, which I think that is this positive Mac, if that's the negative what I just laid out,
yeah,
I think the honor culture transition that you've brought up a lot maybe comes on the other side of that disentanglement.
Yeah, well, okay, so a few things. Number one, on Friday morning, I saw a clip of Lindsey Graham on, I guess, Bill O'Reilly's podcast. Bill O'Reilly, of course, was the number one like ratings on Fox News prior to Tucker Carlson, who replaced him from like the Me Too movement scandal, and that happened like right when Trump came into office. And they were arguing about in this clip about whether or not the relationship between the U.S. and Israel was actually a good thing, and it blew my mind. I'm like, I mean, that is such a great encapsulation of how far we've come. That Bill O'Reilly and Lindsey Graham are having that discussion and that argument. Who would have ever thought that you would have seen that? Like, that's pretty significant. That's a big milestone. I also say, think about the first slander they created against Donald Trump. Who was he? Hitler.
Yep.
I think that was strategic. I think that there were
Chris has been saying that for years. Yeah.
Oh yeah, given all of the rhetoric that Trump said at the beginning of who he was going to go after, right? Like who is to blame for the decline of America? Never said the Jews, but he certainly said the banking system. He certainly said foreign influence over our government.
Yeah,
like that
the
was neocons.
A big one. He went hard on the neocons back in that first era.
He said the Iraq war, like we went in under false pretense. That was like a earth-shattering moment for those who weren't paying attention to politics. When he said that during the Republican primary, that was like people were like gasping, like, "How could you say that in a Republican primary? Like, don't you remember? It was we were the ones who did that." And Trump was like, "Yeah, like you did that. Like y'all are a bunch of lying scumbags. Like y'all are the ones who took us over there." And didn't go as far as like some others and why we went over there, as Joe Kent did in his resignation letter, but. Again, I think all of that is there is like Trump would be fulfilling if he held the press conference and was like, Israel controls our government and that's why we can't have a golden age. He would be fulfilling the prophecy of him being Hitler. It's like, well, of course he could because he's Hitler.
Yeah. And they could all unify against him. Again, they'd all get shielding to unify against him.
And, the real problem, like getting to the honor culture thing about the Christian Zionists is that they're liars. They don't tell the truth about what their intentions are. They say, well, we're just supporting Israel because we love Jesus, right? No, they're supporting Israel. They're supporting it like an empire building conquest to create greater Israel. They're very much aware of this. They're actually also funding these red heifers in Texas that they shipped over to Israel that were sacrificed like a year or two ago. They created those in a lab. And the reason they did that is because that's part of this ritual from Talmudic Judaism that's going to result in like the third temple being built and the Messiah coming. Like all of this is based on Jewish belief of Talmudic Judaism that they're going to summon their Messiah. And then I think the Christian Zionists, if I understand it, some of them at least, believe that will then force the that's the Antichrist. Then Jesus will come back and fight him. So I think either they believe in the Antichrist, like they believe in whatever this thing is that the Talmudic Jews are trying to summon, or they believe that they can use that to force God's hand to get Jesus to come back in a second coming. I don't think either of those are like a good line of like a healthy line of thinking, but they're not honest about any of that. Because if you go listen to the Israeli politicians, they're very honest about it. They're like, yeah, we want to build a third temple. To their credit, we want to summon Moshiach. Like we want to build greater Israel, which is from the Nile to the Euphrates. They're very like, to their credit, pretty. They didn't used to be, but now they're pretty honest about it. A lot of that has to do with like these religious zealots taking over the government. But we need to get to a point where our leaders say what they mean and mean what they say, and don't talk out of both sides of their mouth, because nobody around the world respects us because they don't respect our leaders. They respect Trump because Trump says what he means and means what he says. Like when he says he's going to do something, he does it. And he's a man of his word. Like he talks about in his books how important it is to like shake somebody's hand, say you're going to do something, then go do it. If they can't trust your word, then you can't be a good negotiator. You've lost your ability to negotiate once you've lost your word. And
that tees up this honor culture conversation that you've been kind of on this for a little while. Last time, I think it was either that you were on the narrative or maybe we did a blitz a few weeks ago. You were talking about the Game of Thrones spinoff, Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I finally got to watch that a couple weeks ago. And, there's a great scene in that where they have a trial of the seven. And I highly recommend it, by the way, guys. You do not need to know anything about Game of Thrones. It is a self-contained story, a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, chivalry, honor culture, hero culture. It's violent, but like it is great, just first principles show. And there's an infamous scene or a great scene that goes teed up a few weeks ago, wherein the main character is basically sentenced to a trial by combat against a corrupt prince. And he needs to find 6 other knights to fight alongside him, or he forfeits in front of the gods. And of course, he can't find the 6 knights, the 6th knight. So what happens? He calls out to the nobles and says, is there no honor left among you? Is there no honor left among the noble houses of Westeros? And the man who answers his cry is the uncle of the very prince that he is in the trial by combat against. So because the uncle chooses honor culture over the defense of his own bloodline and literally joins a strange knight, and fights against his own bloodline because he thinks that honor strips even blood. And again, it's a great scene you pointed out at that time, but you just teed up the positive way. If we assume Donald Trump can navigate this Kobayashi Maru, can cut the Gordian knot, and can maybe get away from the sword of Damocles and have it fall on somebody else, it feels like, well, what would we be going toward, right? What would be the response and the whiplash positively toward this era of subterfuge and lying, to your point, and just misdirection and politicking and religious zealotry? It might look a lot like honor culture. And as you've been pointing out, there are some figures on the game board that, if you kind of look closely, seem to have been exhibiting a lot of those traits, even if a lot of the normie hive mind, including in MAGA, has been positioning them as our enemies and as Trump's enemies the whole time.
Yeah. And, again, we want to demand from our leaders that they be honorable, that they be honest, that they say what they mean what they say, stop making us promises and then going and delivering for other people, for your donors, foreign interests, whatever. But before we can do that, we really have to hold ourselves accountable. We see dishonorable behavior out there in the world, like that's being committed by among ourselves. And I think it's like that's a big problem. I think that it's very hypocritical for us to ask for our leaders to be honorable men if we are not honorable men. And that's why the impetus ultimately is on us, like each and every one of us, to change the way that we think, change the way we act, change the way we behave. And that's the only way you're going to reverse this like trend towards like degradation and towards degeneracy, and turn the whole thing around. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take probably generations, but you have to start somewhere. And it's like, why not start right here, right now, today? And I think that, the question kind of becomes from Trump's standpoint, okay, so how do you, like, number one, people saying, like, speaking about this stuff and claiming that they have like authority. They're like, well, I know what's happening. Like, it's obviously this. I don't know what the hell is happening, guys. Like, I'm literally just a guy on his computer, like just reading the same news stories that you're reading. I don't have a security clearance. I don't have intelligence training. I don't have any friends in the government telling me anything. Like, I don't have any of those things. Okay. So my analysis is really just based on instinct and lots and lots of digesting data, like sets of data, large sets of data, synthesizing data.
You can
just autism, weaponized autism. But it's just taking in lots and lots and lots of information. I don't worry about the messenger. I don't worry about, well, it's coming from this guy, so like, can I trust it? Of course, I have those filters, but I'm just taking in information, as much information as I can, and trying to digest it. But I think people are too quick to say, well, I'm not going to listen to this because it's coming from this source.
Right.
When, like every source is probably going to tell the truth at some point, like that, like they're going to weave bad information into good information to sell the bad information. So you should just be taking in information all the time and just not emotionally attaching yourself to any of it. And then that allows you to distill it and synthesize it. But I wanted to play this clip because Joe Kent has obviously become like the center of this week of like the focus. And I found this clip very compelling. This is from like many years ago before he was in the Trump administration, an interview that he did on this podcast. So let's watch this and you kind of get some insight into who he is.
You worked for about 20 years serving in the U.S. military as not only a Green Beret, eventually a CIA paramilitary officer as well. This all culminated when you were working in the Trump administration, and your wife, who was a naval officer, was actually killed while serving in Syria. You blamed her death on rogue elements within the Trump administration whom undermined the president's withdrawal strategy in Syria. Can you explain how you came to that conclusion?
I mean, I was in the military right when the war on terror started. I came in just before 2001. So I was a Green Beret for, I did 11 combat deployments. Then I went right into the CIA as a paramilitary operations officer when I hit the 20-year mark in the military. That was going to be my second career. My late wife, Shannon, was a Navy signals intelligence specialist. She spoke Arabic. So by the time I met her, she already had quite a few combat deployments. She was deployed for the last push to go take out the last bit of ground that ISIS controlled in 2018, and they reached their objective by late November, December of 2018, and that's when Trump sent out a famous tweet. But that tweet also had orders behind it that said, "Hey, let's get our troops out of Syria," because in Trump's mind, this is what the American people hired him to do. He ran on, "Hey, ISIS is out of control. We are going to go in there. We're going to crush and dismantle ISIS." And we very much did that. I was deployed under Obama in 2016 in the counter-ISIS mission, and we had no direction whatsoever. We had no authorities. We were over there very much in harm's way, taking casualties, but we didn't have the leadership at the executive level to make hard decisions and give us the authorities to take out ISIS. Trump came in 2017, and within less than probably about 18 months, we had defeated the Islamic Caliphate, lock, stock, and barrel. They didn't control any more ground. Now, there was a lot of people in permanent Washington, D.C., the administrative state, the national security blob, whatever you want to call it, that they really wanted to stay in Syria. They were mad that we had left Iraq in the first place. We had reestablished a foothold back in northern Iraq, which is relatively peaceful, but we had a foothold in Syria. But that was all tied up with the counter-ISIS mission. But these people at the very senior levels of the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, the State Department, there was a lot of Obama holdouts and even some old George Bush people that just got swept into the Trump administration, like Secretary of Defense Mattis, that they wanted to stay there forever, but they also wanted to turn this into regime change 2.0 against Assad, which to me at that point in my career, I was like, have you guys seen, like, did you guys fight a different war than me? Because every time we do this regime change thing, like, it doesn't work out in our favor. So I was amazed that these people even had the audacity to talk like this. But the orders came down in December of 2018. They were supposed to be out of there. My late wife and everybody else that was in Syria at the time, they were supposed to get on airplanes and fly to Erbil by Christmas Eve of 2018. Now, I could see this all play out in real time. There was a lot of feet dragging going on. There was senior level officials for the administration who were giving the orders, and there was these mid-level appointees that were just like, well, we have to wait till we get more orders, just really tying it up in bureaucratic speak. Because if you've been in the government for any length of time, you understand how to drag your feet. It's not very complicated to do. And unfortunately, I don't think Trump had enough folks that were loyal to him and to his agenda to understand what was happening at the deeper levels of bureaucracy. So I saw this play out. I was talking with my wife, and I was like, I think that they're going to keep you guys there. And she's like, yeah, I kind of get that feeling too. But we do have orders to be out of here by Christmas Eve of 2018. And tragically, they remained. And about a month later, on the 16th of January, 2019, her and 3 other Americans were killed by a suicide bomber in Manbij, Syria. So I had a brief I decided I was going to resign from the government at that time. We have 2 kids, 5 and 7 now, but they were very young. So I just really wanted to focus on my children. But I had a chance to meet Trump at Dover. I basically told him what I just told you. I said, look, you don't know who I am, but I've been fighting these wars at the ground level since they started, really. And you're getting it right in a way that the president has. Your instincts are right. Like when Trump as a candidate said that, like, we got lied to about Iraq and we never should have gone in the first place and we should get out, like that he was 100% right, his gut instinct. So I shared that with him, but then I just told him, I was like, you're getting undermined in a way that I've never seen before. at the mid to senior levels. I came in under Clinton. I served all through Bush. I served all through Obama. And what I saw on day one of the Trump administration, the way that we had mid-level bureaucrats who just basically said that we don't have to listen to the Trump administration. And that's ultimately what led to my wife getting killed.
Yeah. So for those who didn't like fully follow what he just said is so this guy was a Green Beret and then he worked in the CIA. And so because of that, the fact that he was CIA, everyone's like, well, he must be a bad guy because you never leave the farm. Okay, fair. However, he literally just said, my wife, the mother of my children, is dead because of subversive elements in the bureaucracy, in the permanent bureaucracy, specifically the CIA, that refused to follow President Trump's orders to withdraw from Syria. I remember that. I remember 2018 when Trump made that post and said, we're getting out of Syria. By the way, guys, if you go check right now, we are currently in Syria. What are we? This would be 7 years later. I think this is 8 years later. We're 8 years later. I guess maybe 7.5 years later. And we're still in Syria. We still have not fulfilled Trump's order from 7+ years ago where he said, all right, everyone leave. Hasn't happened yet. So that's pretty damning. I would point to, now again, like Chris is great. And what I love about Chris is that he keeps my feet on the ground when we have these discussions, but he, it's like, I don't need Joe Kent to be a good guy. I don't need Tucker Carlson to be a good guy. The white hat, black hat game, I feel like becomes its own little trap where people just sit there and argue about whether like the morality of a person, like a television character that they'll never meet. And then they never actually discuss the substance of whatever the message or the content that is being conveyed. My gut is that if I were going to go recruit somebody to conduct an operation for me, that would be to expose like the truth about Israel and the truth about the subversive elements inside our government, that would be a guy that I would go and recruit because he has he has a vendetta. He has a chip on his shoulder. He can't be negotiated with. He can't be compromised. He can't be leveraged because his wife was killed by these people and he wants revenge. I would justice. I would argue. And before I turn it over to you, I want to play this 1 minute clip. This is what Tucker put out. This is like Tucker's own promo for the interview. Listen, this is Joe Kent's entire thesis throughout the whole interview.
The war with Iran is potentially the end of a lot for the United States. At this point, it feels like there's no way out. What's the answer?
It's going to take drastic action. The good news is this is something that President Trump is uniquely qualified to fix. The main issue is what the Israelis are doing. And he needs to very forcefully, and probably with a new team of diplomats, go to the Israelis and say, you're done. We will defend you. However, you are done going on the offense. This is our war. We're paying for it. We're bleeding for it. If you choose to continue this offensive operation, we will start withdrawing features of your defense system so that you will be on your own. We have to say that to them. And I know a lot of people who like the Israelis are going to say that's wrong, they're under fire. But if we don't address our relationship with the Israelis, even if we come up with a temporary ceasefire, we'll be right back in the same situation in very short order.
How hard will that be?
It will be hard, but again, President Trump can do it.
That's great, man.
President Trump can do it. That was his message.
Yeah.
There's only one person who's uniquely qualified with the right personality to do this, and that's President Trump. That was his entire message. And it felt like everything he said right there was coming out of Trump's mouth, but through Joe Kent. That's like my gut, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's a great. This is what bicameral thinking is supposed to be. Again, I often find myself like trying to remind people of the intent behind that is not to stick to one interpretation. It's to map both forward in time, forward in narrative time, and see which one maps more strongly. And a lot of people think they do that, but they actually just marry themselves to one. So Joe Kent, CIA, bad guy undermining Trump. Okay, map that scenario forward. Keep mapping that scenario forward. But you've got to be able to honestly and earnestly map the other one that you're doing. And on that narrative, it's kind of interesting because that last 1 minute clip you just played, doesn't that sound an awful lot like us talking about the Kobayashi Maru and James T. Kirk? And again, when I first started writing about the Kobayashi Maru, it was more about this. You know, lately, I've really gotten into talking about the actuals. energy disentanglement, financial disentanglement, the disentangling and transition of the petrodollar back to the US dollar. And what does that mean? But my original framing of the Kobayashi Maru, and if anybody doubts this, I do like to just show people the receipts, which Ghost is full of receipts. He's always got a clip saying one of these things. For me, it's my articles. November 3rd, 2023, The Impossible Task. And what was the subhead here? Peace was always an option. And this is my response to October 7th, and basically all about Trump having to what would be the most difficult narrative battle space for the narrative war master, as I've been calling him since 2022, to navigate. Probably the relationship between the US government and the Christian contingent and Israel. That is the most difficult task for Donald Trump to navigate, and it's interesting that you point out Joe Kent is saying he is uniquely qualified to take that task on. So if we take that framing, and then you rewind and go earlier in this show tonight, we're just laying out some scenarios. And for me, I say, okay, if that is the end game, if Donald Trump's end game is to disentangle us from these forever wars in the Middle East, and more importantly, to the point Kent made at the end there, to disentangle us and remove us from the potential for future entanglements in the Middle East, our relationship over there must fundamentally change, right? We would agree with that, whether or not you like Joe Kent. Most people in this audience would agree with that. How do we get there? And that's when my mind starts going to, well, how do you get the narrative shielding to publicly break from Israel, not just to Normieville, but to Christians, to longtime Republicans, to Zionists even? How does Donald Trump get the political and social capital to break from them? It would be, in my view, Donald Trump and Iran getting closer and closer to a deal, and Israel just not really wanting that to happen. And again, let's say this all goes the way we think it will, and we'll get a peace deal there, whether that's an expansion of the Abraham Accords or something brand new. How do you stop it from happening again? Well, you deprive them of the actual and the narrative of nuclear weaponry in the first place. And you make sure both sides are deprived of that. So you don't have the actual, whatever you think is going on there. I've got my doubts about the nuclear capabilities of all these players. I'm one of those. But even if you think all that's very true and very scary as defined to us, if those things are removed from the board, they have lost the narrative of escalation, and more importantly than escalation, they lose the narrative impetus behind preemptive attacks on these nations. They both lose it on each other. The Iranians can no longer attack the Israelis if the Israelis don't have a nuclear threat, sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. The Israelis can no longer attack the Iranians because they're gonna get a nuke. And I think that's a lot of what we're going toward. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, I want to tee you up for the Gulf states as we're kind of winding down here, because I know that that's a lot of where your mind has been at, and with Vladimir Putin and Sovereign Alliance members with this honor culture thing of saying, you know, how do we reach these new treaties? How do we make sure this stuff doesn't, you know, we're leaving one era of geopolitics. In your mind, why does honor culture have so much to do with what the new era needs to be in this geopolitical realm?
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, it's like, I think it just comes down to respect. It's like respect and integrity, which, you know, we live in a world now where being dishonest and unscrupulous is almost like considered a virtue, like gamesmanship from a gamesmanship perspective, like
Machiavellian.
Yeah, it's like, oh, like I won the negotiation because I was able to trick them into doing something they shouldn't have done, and now they've agreed to terms that are ultimately really, really bad for them, but I win, so that makes me the better man, right? Like that's kind of how like our world is viewed now. And if you've read Trump's books and you understand Trump's thinking, that's not how Trump approaches the deal. Like when he does the art of the deal, now there might be people that he has dealt with that way because they were being, you know, very, very hyper aggressive and unscrupulous to him. But if you understand how he puts deals together, because he loves to put deals together, what he likes to do is he likes to put together deals where everyone wins, where everyone walks away from the deal saying, damn, like that worked out for me. Right. And that makes them more eager, by the way, to come back and do another deal with Donald Trump the next time around. It's like victory begets victory. Right. Like the idea of like Jesus, like do a good deed, pay it forward, and then that person will pay it forward. And then everyone has the feels, right? Everyone feels good. And that kind of spreads that ethos. It's very similar. I think it's a similar mindset. Now, getting back to, the Arabs, the Russians, the Chinese, again, I feel very frustrated for Putin. I feel very frustrated for a lot of these leaders because they don't feel like they have an earnest partner that they can deal with in the West, because every single country in the West is run by a scumbag, like a lying scumbag. They're all just lying scumbags who do not say what they mean. They do not mean what they say. And they will say one thing when they're trying to get elected and then turn around and do the complete opposite once they're in power. And again, is that a reflection of democracy, or is that like representative government, or is that a reflection of the nefarious elements that have taken control of representative government in the West? And I think it's the latter. And then understanding what is that thing, like what is this parasite, that like this octopus that has its tentacles in us? And, is it Israel? Is it the diaspora? Is it, a consortium of different groups, different factions that all are working, like criminal groups that are all working together? Who knows? But Israel's a big one. I mean, this is a very, very big one that our foreign policy certainly seems to be controlled by Israel, and probably other things as well, to the extent that you now have the weaponization of free speech. You have the sheriff in Miami showing up at people's houses, knocking on their door and saying, hey, maybe you should take that anti-Semitic post on Facebook down because you might inspire somebody else to go do something violent. Like that's, by the way, how it all started in Europe 10 years ago, like Britain 10 years ago, where they started there. Like, your language might incite somebody else to go do something violent, so you shouldn't talk like that. And that's how that's how it all starts. And then before you know it, they're kicking down doors and dragging away kids who are shit posting online and saying mean things. And it's like, it really happens that quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Jew question, the reason we try to unabashedly talk about it on all sides is because that's the Trojan horse for this kind of stuff. And the honor culture point I think is interesting. And I think to focus in on the Iranian theater in particular we're talking about, I think it's really interesting. One of the things you and I talked about via DM before the show was the idea that, Donald Trump's peace tours, in his most famous peace tours, I believe occurred in 2017 and then 2025, the beginning of both terms, both public terms. And the real highlight of the peace tours was the Middle East. We had Saudi Arabia and the sword dance, the infamous sword dance, and you've done a ton of content on that from 2017. And then look at what happens in 2025. We get Donald Trump going to Saudi Arabia, to the UAE, Doha, I believe, and then who was the third? Doha, Qatar, and then the UAE, right?
Yes.
So it was the Saudis,
The
UAE,
Qataris and the Emiratis,
and Qataris. And who is thrust into center stage right now in terms of a high pressure cooker narrative actual scenario? Everybody's focused on the US and Iran, but who's right on the periphery there? We've got the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Arabians. They're all right there. And in the last week in particular, a lot of that rhetoric, while they are right now threatening Iran and saying like, hey, we're going to fucking go after you if you keep fucking around with us, they're also lobbing a few narrative grenades over at Israel and saying, you provoked the latest attack on us. So I'm not saying that the Arab nations are like defending Iran in the central narrative right now, but they are saying we want peace. And a lot of what you focused on in your commentary with those two peace tours from Donald Trump, with those nations in particular, is that very public display of honor culture coming back. So it's kind of interesting that we've got all these players orbiting the Iranian crisis right now. And I wonder how you see that playing out, like the 2017 and 2025 seeding, and how these Gulf players and Donald Trump are going to come into the narrative here in a bigger way.
Well, so here's I can actually let them speak for themselves. Here is a clip from this past week of Turkey and Qatar, traditionally not great friends, but they've become better friends recently. And they are certain, like these two represent, outside of Saudi Arabia, these two represent Donald Trump's closest allies in the Middle East. Tamim, the leader of Qatar, he talks about Qatar all the time, how much he loves them. And then this is Hakan Fidan, the foreign minister of Turkey, and Trump's talked about how Erdogan is just his guy, like that he's my guy in the Middle East. So here's a joint press conference from the two of them. Listen to what they both say.
Bringing the crisis to resolution through diplomatic methods. It should be expressly indicated that the primary responsible party for this war that has drawn our region to an unprecedented crisis is Israel.
Okay, so that's Turkey. Here's Qatar.
Say that this war need to stop immediately. The aggression need to stop immediately, because everyone knows who is the big beneficiary of this war and dragging the whole region into this conflict. And unfortunately, what's taking place now, it's a serve for those agendas. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so he's saying everyone knows who the real beneficiary of this is. Like, it's obviously Israel. And again, like, I have people in my responses and replies being like, well, how can you say that Israel is the one controlling everything? Like, it's China. China's the one controlling everything. Well, really? When's the last war that we started on behalf of China? Like, what was the last time? Like, what country did we invade on behalf of China? What country did we invade on behalf of Russia or on behalf of Venezuela? The answer is none. We've never started a war on behalf of China or behalf of Russia or behalf of Venezuela. So it's very silly to assert that any of those countries influence our government to the extent that they control what we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's like just being honest. Like let's just look at the net effect. Like, why did we invade Iraq? I mean, go read Joe Kent's resignation letter and tell me which part you disagree with, because he says Israel created ISIS. I mean, that's something I've been saying for years. He says the Iraq war was started on behalf of Israel, like to benefit Israel. Been saying that for years. Like, go through every single thing. The Syria war, like to overthrow Assad, started on behalf of Israel. Been saying that for years. It's like he's only saying the things that the rest of us have been saying for many, many years, presenting the research. He's just being honest about it and getting destroyed over it, like both the left and the right coming after him. But nobody really wants to address like the content of what he's saying. Like, is what he's saying true? Like, I don't need him to be a good guy, by the way. He can be a bad guy. He can be a good guy. The net effect of what he's done, though, is he has shifted the Overton window that I'm getting text messages from family members who refuse to like engage with this narrative for years, and now finally have said, you know what? I think Israel actually is the issue here. I think we actually need to talk about this. Lindsey Graham and Bill O'Reilly talking about it. It's like, it's here now. Like, we're having the discussion.
And one of the ways I had framed Joe Kent in my own kind of hypothetical of it that we talked about in the brief this past week, we both wrote about him in a few different topics. And again, not knowing what the intention is there, but I said, okay, if this is to use Miss Rise Attire in the chat earlier tonight talked about central casting. I'm not closed off to those ideas. Say, okay, well, what does that mean? Besides just TV character, Patriots in control. And I think what she's getting at is, the idea of Trump knowing who these people are. And the term I had used in the brief this week in regards to that reading of Donald Trump and Joe Kent is to say, what would be the purpose of Joe Kent going out there and saying stuff like this? The term I used was a cognitive ranger or a narrative ranger, somebody who Trump can deploy to the outer edges of the Overton window within his own base. And as you've been pointing out this week, what is the net effect of Joe Kent's deployment over the last week? An intra-MAGA argument about the nation of Israel and its relationship with the United States, and specifically with American conservatism and republicanism. Is that argument happen? Can that argument be weaponized? Absolutely. Are people trying to weaponize it? Absolutely. Is that argument happening a net positive or a net negative? And that's to each their own. I think it's a net positive. And I, for one, don't think Donald Trump is sitting there saying, I'm really upset that my base is arguing over whether or not we should be interventionists on behalf of Israel. So when you kind of reverse engineer those assumptions and those premises, it might change how you look at some of these figures. And, again, you said earlier, it's unlikely Donald Trump's going to get up at the podium and take Israel to task yet. Yeah. He's totally comfortable within the Overton window taking bad actors within Iran to task and within Europe to task. And he calls them our so-called allies. And by the way, I dug up recently, you know how Trump calls Europe our so-called allies? He's been saying that since 1987. So in a lot of these old interviews that are coming up that people are bringing up in various contexts, Donald Trump has been referring to, at the time it was Japan, big economic player in the 80s, and Europe, our post-World War II allies, he called them our so-called allies on his TV interviews. So long time. No, we don't need it. We're not going to get any arguments from this community. But yeah, you can reverse engineer these things. And last little question I have for you is a little question. Given the Gulf states in particular, and what you've been talking about with honor culture, and I guess a positive reading of how Donald Trump can untangle this stuff, when it comes to regions of responsibility and this region in the Middle East, where do you see the end game? Like, let's just say Donald Trump and the Sovereign Alliance get what they want in the Middle East. What does that framework, what does a stable kind of multipolar framework look like to you specifically in that region?
Well, I mean, I would say that let's just start with Israel, because I think that's the turd in the punch bowl. I think in Israeli society that is not a theocratic society, which is it totally is right now. And all you have to do is go listen to Jonathan Greenblatt, or from the ADL, or Ronald Lauder, from the guy who owns Estee Lauder, the makeup company, who's also the president of the World Jewish Congress, talk about this stuff. And they say that Zionism and Judaism are one and the same, and they can't be removed. So if you criticize the government of Israel, you are criticizing the religion of Judaism and the Jewish people. Like, that has to stop. Like, we have to obviously end that ridiculous political conflation. And having a truly secular Israel is what needs to happen. And now how does that happen? That's not our problem to figure out. That's their problem to figure out. But if they can't get along with the other kids on the playground, they're going to get their ass kicked, and we're not going to sit there and protect them anymore. I think Joe Kent made that point on the Tucker interview, and I think he's right. It's like, if they're not going to, if they're going to go around and pick fights with all the other kids on the playground, we should start pulling back our defensive architecture that is there to protect them. Now, putting them aside, let's just assume that powder keg is totally diffused. What does the rest look like? Well, I go back to the statement that Trump's made since the beginning, which is peace through strength. And what does that actually mean? Like, peace through strength? Because, I mean, the U.S. military has been the strongest military since the end of World War II, right? I mean, we have dominated the world. We've policed the world. So we've been strong. Like, there's no denying that we're strong. So when he says peace, we need a new model, peace through strength. Like, that almost implies that we weren't the strong before, right? Unless you consider the fact that when he says peace through strength, he means the strength of other countries to balance out, to have a mutually assured destruction dynamic, where if you have a strong Turkey, a strong Saudi Arabia, and a strong Iran in the Middle East, that's a totally stable Middle East, because nobody's going to go pick a fight because they don't want to get their asses kicked by the other two tough guys on the playground. And frankly, if every country in the Middle East was really strong, that would be even better. But if you can only have a few, that at least balances it out, so that you're not because again, look at Europe. Europe hasn't had a war in the past century. Now, there's probably some nefarious negotiations that occurred. But I also think the world wars were conducted in order to destroy Europe. But a lot of it is because there's peace through strength. It's like Germany understands that if they attack France, they could potentially get nuked, and vice versa. It's like, that's led to this stabilization that Europe hasn't had in centuries. So I think that that's where we're going, is that it has to be, if you're going to have regions of responsibility, First of all, we have to trust these people to manage their own region without us. Like, we walk away and we don't look back, other than just to be friends with them. A lot of people are uncomfortable with that. There are a lot of people who don't want the U.S. military to leave the Middle East or leave China, like leave Asia, like Southeast Asia. That's ridiculous. Like, if we want to have a small presence there, like a small base, fine. But we don't need to be the world police. We don't need to have like a base in every single country in the world. We have like 800 or 900 bases. We don't need all that shit. Like, it's ridiculous. Bring the kids home. Bring the troops home.
You could argue that that last point you made was the defining difference in the story between what MAGA was supposed to be and what republicanism was supposed to be. And by that, I mean neoconservatism, as you pointed out earlier. Like, if there was one thing that separated MAGA from neocons, it was that. Interventionism. Foreign interventionism. Donald Trump is against it. I firmly agree with how you laid that out, and the one point I'd add on top of it goes back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, and that is that you can't... I understand why Trump feels like he can't just walk away from the table with the geopolitical game board set up the way it has been set up by his predecessors. So there is this escalation to de-escalation, this disentanglement, this cutting of the Iranian knot, and many other situations, a resetting of the game board. And my theory tonight is that, the nuclear disarmament narrative, including Israel. Once you get a reset game board, to your point, then I think we can have a clean exit and there's no mandate for re-interventionism. But if you don't have a clean exit, then it's a harder mandate to set, I think. So, I think we'll see where this thing goes. But hey, they've been saying, it's kind of interesting that Trump and Bessent and all the usual suspects are basically saying, yeah, this might have been longer than the Venezuela op and, narrative, but it is going to be shorter than you think. And, I'm not we've been aligned on this, and Chris Paul and John, and, we're not like everything's about the midterms guys. But I will say that according to the central narrative, it would be very difficult to see Donald Trump winning a narrative about the midterms if this keeps going on a long timeline. Because just in Normieville, it just isn't going to work no matter how much we get on shows and talk about the brilliance that's on display here. People don't care. They care how expensive their lives are, and if that allows them to steal midterms.
In the optics of war, the optics of like us being in conflict. But here's the thing that I think puts us on that condensed timeline. There's an election in Israel in October, and there's a real like fear, I think, from Netanyahu's standpoint, that he's going to lose this election. And if he loses the election, he's going to go to prison, because the pardons department just came back and said, Trump said, pardon Netanyahu. Well, there's a process where they go and they review for 90 days and say, is this a legitimate request? And they came back this past week and said, nope, it's not a legitimate request. We can't give you a pardon. We're sorry. So he's not getting the pardon, which means he's going to press full court press, because I think the only way that he's going to win public mandate to stay in office is if he expands the borders of Israel. If he takes southern Lebanon, if he takes parts of Syria, if he takes over Palestine, or if he defeats Iran, like in a war. Like, those are the things that I think are going to get him public mandate to stay in office. And so he's going to push for that as quickly as he can. And that escalation, that forced escalation, is going to, I think, to Scott Bessent's point, it's going to force de-escalation just as quickly. So we'll see. And the last thing I'll like, going back to honor culture, this is from, I just stumbled on this looking at GART clips the other day. This is from November, Cocoa Beach, a question from Oak. And I think this is what happened, by the way, like with Mike Huckabee and with Ted Cruz, like going on a long form podcast, Tucker in this case, but it could be anything, and being forced to answer questions. Like, listen to this exchange.
The things that allows us to people is accountability and responsibility. And those two words have become dirty words in our society, and we have to change that. Everybody has to be held accountable for what they do, their performance, what they say, what they don't say. And I think we all agree with that. And our leaders, we're not going to respect them until they take responsibility for the things that they do. And we don't see that right now. So how do we get back? How do we change And I don't know that there is an answer or an easy answer, but how do we change so that we do have accountability and responsibility, and that's not a dirty word in our society anymore?
Well, it's a good question, and I again I go back to the friction and the confrontation, and being able to question things and being able to confront Megyn Kelly and being able to confront whoever the public figure is. It's a great point, because holding them accountable means being able to ask them hard questions and put them in a position where answering the question that they don't want to answer is going to make them either look foolish or maybe look like a fraud. If you don't have the opportunity to ask that question, then how are you ever going to get that moment? How are you ever going to have accountability? And the problem is that when they only go and speak to CBS or Fox News or MSM or whoever, the questions are not the questions that we actually want to ask them. And so if you don't have those opportunities and there is no confrontation and there is no accountability, then you're never going to break out of the system that Donald Trump is trying to break us out of.
Yeah, I think that's...
There you go.
Yeah. There you go.
Great shit, Ghost. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Honor culture, Kobayashi Maru's, Iranian knots. I'm sure Ghost will just end up becoming permanent co-host at some point. He's back every 3 weeks anyway. So thanks for joining me, man. You got to run off. You got to scamper off to the brief dungeons.
Yes, I do.
Because Ghost is the lead on the Monday brief. So subscribe to the Badlands Substack, guys. I'll let you go, Ghost, and I'll just grab a couple rants and get out of here.
Thanks for having me, man. Always enjoy these conversations.
Yeah, good shit, dude.
See ya.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I think that was some good stuff. Yeah, it's the Kobayashi Maru, and I know these are like catch-all terms, and trust the master, and Trump's got a plan, and trust the plan, and most of us do, right? But it's fun to have these conversations of like, okay, if we are watching the plan, what is it? And how might it end is usually where I start. Where might we be going? What is the current lay of the land? What has to occur between this and that in order for that to be actualized? And I don't know. So hope you guys enjoy some of those suppositions, and we'll see how accurate we are on the macro. Tend to get better at this stuff over time. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Please hit the thumbs up button. If you did, I'll hit a couple rants here. Tom Terrific, 54, $25, as always, for the cause. Thank you, Tom. It's not go unappreciated. It's almost like it becomes a habit when it's like, oh, Tom Terrific. But I understand it's a donation. It is a unique donation every time, and we truly do appreciate that. Tropical Rocket, $10. If Trump blows up Iran's power plants, the world as we know it is going to end. You might be right on a few counts there. Might not be a bad world as we know it changing type of thing. D-Mob, $20, one of my favorite shows. Thank you, D-Mob. Appreciate that. And then Melindy sends a $5 over. BB, dogmatic, not spiritual. And yes, I agree with you. I meant spiritual war in terms of spiritual like awakening and sifting that's going on. And maybe to your point, the spiritual awakening is Donald Trump amplifying the dogma within people that do not consider themselves dogmatic, and putting that on display for everybody around them who is spiritual, right? That might be a good way to sort of put it. And I do want to promote our Substack, badlands.substack.com, guys. It is free. If you do want to support us over there, that support goes directly to Badlands. It goes to me. It goes to Ghost. It goes to Ash. All the stuff we do over there is free. We not only do the brief 5 days a week, we switch off who's the lead on the brief. That takes a lot of time. Myself, Ghost, and Ash are in a Telegram chat all week, passing stories back and forth. It's a whole extra, run of content that you don't get on the shows in written form. And what we started doing this year, I created the Badlands Blitz, and Ghost and Ash switch off with me on that one, or switch off with each other on that one. Sometimes they both do it. Ghost and I were on the Blitz this Saturday. That hits your inbox on Saturday. That is a full show. That's a full podcast. And it's only an hour. And we do actually keep it to between 60 and 70 minutes. So we've been doing a pretty good job of that. It's like an InfoWars sprint. And reviews have been great. Really appreciate the support over there. And for the theme of this week's episode, if you guys fancy, go to burningbright.substack.com. My latest article is like part 3 of a series I accidentally started writing, starting with Trump and the path of the torpedo. Trump's test last week, which was very popular, reached some new eyes. And now the Iranian Knot on the true Kobayashi Maru and Donald Trump's InfoWar posture. Again, if you guys do want other ways to support, you can support me independently over on my Substack, but it's all free as well. So the Iranian Knot, I think that one is a much deeper dive into some of the stuff we talked about today. Tonight we talked a lot about the themes and the narratives. Ironically, even though I'm focused on narrative, that article goes much deeper into how I see it being disentangled on an actual level. So check that out if you guys want to. I'll drop a link in the chat for that. And otherwise, I'm going to outro with the intro. Go join the queue after hours, boys. See what they have to say about all this nonsense. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next Sunday night, just a couple Sundays before GART. Looking forward to seeing a lot of you guys in Nashville. Oh, one more thing. I know I've dropped the ball on this. We've had a lot going on. We got a 14-month-old running around. There are some copies of Swordpunk, the leather-bound Swordpunk, that we have that are left over from people canceling orders and things like that during the campaign last year. We've got a few copies. If you are interested in buying one of those copies, we already paid for the production and all that kind of stuff. Please email realmrsburningbright@gmail.com. She's got a waiting list, but if you're on that, if you don't know if you're on that or not, reach out. We're going to try to get those spun out within the next week or two and send those last copies out for people that are interested. And maybe, we'll do another print run if I write a sequel. But if anybody was interested in those, reach out to her and we'll get you on a list. We'll get the list in order and we'll tell you how to buy those copies because, there's only a few left. Otherwise, as I always say, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. See you guys next week.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, my lord?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. You forbear me. Captain Armor, I do not know what strength is like that.
swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people. I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.